Julia Garner stars as a struggling dancer who's drawn in by dark forces in the new psychological thriller Apartment 7A. Buy it on digital or stream it now on Paramount Plus. Rated R. Head to ParamountPlus.com/Apartment7A to try it free.
This episode is brought to you by Interview with the Vampire. The timeless saga of love, betrayal, and the burden of immortality continues. Louis delves further into his interview, chronicling his ambitious escape with Claudia after their calculated murder of Lestat. The journey to rebuild their lives leads them to post-war Paris, where they uncover forgotten secrets while being lured into a mysterious vampire coven. Blu-ray includes limited edition collectible art cards featuring characters and quotes. Interview with the Vampire Season 2 is now available on DVD and Blu-ray.
When you need mealtime inspiration, it's worth shopping Kroger for thousands of appetizing ingredients that inspire countless mouth-watering meals. And no matter what tasty choice you make, you'll enjoy our everyday low prices. Plus, extra ways to save, like digital coupons worth over $600 each week and up to $1 off per gallon at the pump with points. So you can get big flavors and big savings. Kroger, fresh for everyone. Fuel restrictions apply.
Slashers, huh? What's your favorite scary movie?
Not that one.
And welcome back to Horror Queers. We're talking a whole family of Draculas. We're talking the decline of the slaughterhouse. And we're talking 40 minutes of just straight screaming. And I'm Joe.
And I'm Trace, and we're talking...
Not bad, not bad.
I practiced that, I'm not gonna lie. Everyone, we are discussing Tobe Hooper's original masterpiece, the Texas Chain Saw Massacre.
I appreciate the pause. Thank you.
I honestly, I don't know how else. Is it a grammatical error? Like, did they know? I don't actually. That's the one thing I don't know about this film.
Maybe it's an IP thing, and they wanted to make sure that people could distinguish it. I'm actually saying no to that because this is 1974.
Yeah, I don't know if that was. There's a lot of stuff going on with this film that I admittedly did not know, which I'm going to be happy to talk about. But yeah, Joe, this is our 4th week celebrating divas and anniversaries.
Indeed, yes. Of course, we're talking about Sally Hardesty, but I would just say, 50 years for the Texas Chain Saw Massacre seems pretty solid.
Man, this is wild. I cannot believe it's been that long. But, God, Joe, I wasn't going to say this, but I feel intimidated by this movie. I feel like I say this every time we cover a movie like this, be it Psycho or... What else? This? I think Hellraiser was a big one. Hellraiser was one I felt pretty intimidated by.
Sure, yeah. It's the text that we know people have a very personal connection or relationship to.
Yeah, absolutely. But okay, I don't want to get too far ahead before we start getting into the nitty-gritty. So let's bring in our guest who is waiting in the wings. Everyone, she is a co-host and the music aficionado of both the Losers Club and Halloweenies podcasts. You may have also heard her appearances on other podcasts like The Pod and the Pendulum and The Girls on the Boys, the latter of which is on the Anatomy of a Scream podcast network. Please welcome Rachel Reeves.
Hi, hello. Revving up my chainsaw.
Did you practice that?
No, but I'm glad it turned out okay.
You know what? That's a sign of a good podcaster. She just knows how to do it.
I just went for it, and...
You should look at the voice work.
Why, thank you. My dad does that, so maybe it's in the family genes.
Oh, which is appropriate given that this is a film that's all about family.
It's all about family. And no, we're not talking about Fast and the Furious, although that is also all about family.
It is all about family. It's slightly different tones. Although, honestly, now I kind of want to watch Fast and the... Well, I want to watch 5, 6, 7, 8... and 10. That's it.
Oh my God. We are not doing a ranking of Fast and the Furious movies. We have too much to talk about.
So, Rachel, welcome to the show. I'm curious. I'm just going to dive right in. Do you remember when you first saw this movie?
I do, because this is a film for me that really it's one of the few films I think kind of reshaped how I looked at horror, because I came to horror a little bit late just because I wasn't exposed to it through like my family. I'm the oldest child, so I didn't have that cool older brother to kind of show me the ropes or anything like that.
Right.
And so I started exploring horror a bit more in high school when I had the freedom to, basically, right? Like I could rent my own movies and I could watch them while I was babysitting other people's kids.
Oh, God.
And so I got into it very much in like the Scream era, the I Know What You Did Last Summer and The Faculty, Disturbing Behavior. And then as I started seeing some older films, it was like, oh, not everything is this glossy. Not everything is this shiny, right? And so it really, like this and Alien for me were incredibly eye-opening because they were both so gritty and dark and scary, and the practical effects. And it was like, oh my God, it was a side of horror I had not been exposed to. So that always just that very visceral initial reaction, I will never forget.
Man, I feel like visceral is a term that we are going to drop so often in this film. So ironically enough, I'm actually covering this movie twice this month because I'm looking at this on my other podcast, Murder Made Fiction, with Jen Adams, Rachel, your co-host on The Girls and the Boys.
Yes.
And I described this to her as being in smell-o-vision because I feel like this is a movie that you smell as much as you watch. Like, that is how visceral it feels to me.
Well, I think it's just because they all actually smelled very, very, very badly when they were filming this movie.
Too. Yeah.
Like, so it was real. It's not even acting. It just is real. But, well, Joe, do you remember when you first saw this?
Ironically enough, I think it would have been around the same time as Rachel, sometime in the 90s, but it was one of those films where I did not appreciate it. I was like, this is a classic. Everybody talks about this film. It's so important to horror. And I just thought, there's no character development. It's so gross looking. And it is honestly Sally screaming for the entire last half of this movie. So I walked away from it not appreciating the social commentary that Hooper was doing, not appreciating what a technical feat it is for an independent film. Like, I was a total dum-dum kid. So it's taken me a long time to come around to appreciating this film, even if I confess it's not my favorite still.
I think it's a film that I respect more than I want to watch often, because I do think that watching this film is a bit of an endurance test.
Yeah.
But Joe, funnily enough, and I think I may have talked about this when we covered the remake with Jessica Biel on the Patreon a couple years ago. Everyone go listen to that. But I saw the remake first. You know, that remake was a movie that I was so excited to see. I was 14 when it came out, so like I still wasn't allowed to watch R-rated movies, and I was begging my mom to let me go, and I bugged her so much that finally, like, she was like, if you just shut up, I will let you go see this movie.
You wore her down. Yeah.
I wore her down. Like, because we were going to a wedding in New Orleans, and I couldn't go see it that weekend. That was the weekend it opened, and I was like begging her at the line at the airport, and she was like, if you just let me get through this weekend, you can go see it next week with your dad.
Okay, and then how does that pertain to the 74 version?
So, basically, I saw the remake, and I loved it. And so I was like, oh, I guess I should probably go back and watch the original. And this is around the time I was doing, you know, like, oh, I'm getting all these horror movie classics mailed to me via Netflix. Like, that's what I was doing back in 2003. And I thought it was really boring the first time I saw it.
Okay.
No, I know, but it's because I was expecting something that was a lot more gory and something that was a lot more modern-y, slasher-y. And so I didn't appreciate this film for actually quite a long time. I don't remember when I probably revisited it again when I was in college, you know, years later. And it's a film that I've seen it many times since, and every time I watch it, I think I find more things to appreciate about it. But
it's one of those films.
I do think that, I mean, as you said, there's no character development. It's a lot of screaming. There's no gore in this movie, which was a shock to 14-year-old Trace.
Which is funny that you say that, because so often this is the film that people will cite as, oh my God, it's so incredibly violent. Like, this is the movie where we put a woman on a hook and it's completely misogynistic. And you're like, well, it might be the latter, but there's definitely nothing that you see of the former.
Well, that's the thing, though. I think it's violent. I don't think it's gory.
Okay.
Yeah. It's so funny because I do think of it that way. And every time I watch it, I'm just reminded, oh, yeah, there's not actually a lot. But I'm excited to dig into that more, like why that is, because I do think it's some very intentional and some very interesting choices that are made that make it feel that way. But I never choose is the wrong word. Like, this isn't a film that I'm like, ooh, what am I aching to watch?
Like, let's watch Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
TCM, you know, like.
See, though, I am that way with the remake, though. Like, I will put on the remake whenever.
The remake is so fun. That and iconic, and it's one of the rare of those films, right, of that era, those remakes that actually worked so well.
Well, and that's the thing too, because similar to how this film, it's like, you know, everyone's like, oh my god, it's so gory, and you're like, well, actually, it's not.
It's
gory.
not.
And while that remake is absolutely gorier than this one because there just is gore in it, if you go back and look at reviews at the time, like so many reviews, like, oh my god, it's so disgusting, and this is like pre-Saw, pre-Hostel, but like going on and on about how gory it is. And honestly, if you look at it, it's kind of tame by today's standards.
Yeah, it's wild. I think you're right, Rachel. It's very strategic ways of shooting and then how we're editing. Like, to me, this film is a feat of editing.
It's trick of the hand, right? It's all
it's a magic trick.
It's all an illusion.
And I think that's the thing too, because I think your casual viewer can look at this and be like, wow, this is a really sloppily made film. It just looks so shitty. It's so low budget, blah, blah, blah. But the craft and like the work that Tobe Hooper put into like crafting this film is, I mean, it's wild. And but because of how it looks, people think it's like not a lot of effort went into it.
Right. Yeah.
But, okay, well, let's jump in, because I was not sure how I was going to do this production history, but we're going to go through this, and I will confess, a lot of this is coming from the 2000 documentary, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, The Shocking Truth, which if you bought the 4K that came out last year, it's on that, so woohoo.
Okay.
But, okay, so yeah, this is Texas Chainsaw Massacre, directed by Tobe Hooper. He co-wrote the film with Kem Henkel, who, of course, would go on to write and direct Texas Chainsaw Massacre: The Next Generation, or The Return of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, depending on which cut you're watching. Please go listen to our episode on that.
Right.
But in 1973, Hooper was a graduate from the film program at the University of Texas at Austin. Hello, that's also where I went. I went to UT Austin's film school program. But at the time, he had just made a small film that had cost about $40,000 called Eggshells, and he had also co-written this with Henkel. So they were like buddy-buddy.
Right.
But he also filmed like some PBS documentaries, some educational videos, and he was like, I want to go to Hollywood. Like, and I can't get there by making art films with limited audience appeal. So he and Henkel brainstormed and came up with the conclusion that they'd have to write a film in an established genre. And what easier, well, maybe not easy, but what more obvious one to do than the horror genre?
Which is wild, right? We're talking about a movie that's filming in 1973, comes out in 1974, and I feel like we're still having this conversation 50 years later where people are like, well, I didn't really want to make a horror film, or I'm reticent to call it a horror film, but I needed to do this because it's the only genre that's guaranteed to make money.
It's such a weird thing. Like, this conversation pops up every day.
All the time.
Or like, horror's back. It's like, it never went anywhere. It's always and it's always used as like a vessel to break into some other genre because for some reason this is so much easier, right?
Yeah.
Like, this is, and it has the built-in audience,
but it's a low genre.
Yeah, like, that's a bad thing. That's not a bad thing.
Yeah, no, we don't want to be associated with it. And you're just like, or you could just say, it's a genre that makes money, and in order to do it well, you actually have to know your shit. Like, that's why horror has a bad reputation, because a bunch of people just try to make a shitty horror film.
They'll just assume we'll take anything, right? And it's like, no, if it's good, we will welcome you with open arms. But if it's bad, we'll say, see ya.
I mean, Night Swim is like one of the highest grossing horror films of this year, so I don't know about that.
Oh my
but
God, Trace,
that's a good point.
How dare you?
No, but it's interesting, right? Because this is the early 70s, so what the horror genre would become, especially by the 80s, like, that wasn't what it was yet. And so like, this is kind of like horror is breaking out, it really kicked off. I mean, obviously we can talk about Hitchcock's Psycho. Everyone go listen to our episode on that. But
I mean, same source material. If you want to hear more, listen to Murder Made Fiction.
Yes, but it was really Romero's Night of the Living Dead in 68, and then Wes Craven's The Last House on the Left in 72 that were really breaking boundaries and kind of establishing like, hey, this is what horror is now. And so, of course, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, I think, would be added to that pile, because I think this does influence, obviously, countless films.
And I think, like, tapping into some anxieties in such a strong way that a lot of other films weren't necessarily. And so, I mean, I feel like you talk about those three films right there. Like, just the social commentary and the impact and the things that those films are touching on whether or not people were even aware. Like, I can't help but think that that was a huge part of how they caught on and why they were so successful and impactful.
100%.
Yeah.
But when coming up, because again, they knew they wanted to do a horror movie, but what were they going to do? So Hooper had a fascination with notorious murderer Ed Gein, because, and notice I didn't say serial killer because we can't prove that he was a serial killer.
Well, he killed at least 2 women.
Yeah, well, okay, so nevertheless, Hooper had family that lived in Wisconsin, and when he was 3 or 4, they came to visit, and every time, like, they would visit, they had this story about the guy that covered up his furniture with human skin and made human skin lampshades, and so I'm sure Tobe Hooper being a 3 or 4-year-old, that stuck with him for a long time.
Yeah.
Now, a quick primer on Ed Gein, but I won't go too deep into it because, as Joe said, you can go listen to it on his other podcasts, but Ed Gein grew up in the 30s in Plainfield, Wisconsin. He had a domineering mother who instilled in him strict religious guidelines and the idea of all women as filthy, diseased harlots. By the way, I love the word harlots.
Oh, boy.
It just has a bite to it, Like, it's not really a good insult anymore because, like, who cares? But, like, I just love that word, harlot.
Harlot. Yeah.
Well, it feels like an old-timey slur, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It's like they were like hussy.
Yes, hussy.
Yeah, but see, hussy doesn't have the bite that harlot does, Anyway, so Gein's mom passed away. He sealed off her bedroom and kept the house exactly as it was when she was alive. And in his loneliness, he began talking to himself, graduated to digging fresh graves and bringing parts of the bodies home. And he would eat the flesh, make furniture out of bones, dress up in the skin of the cadavers. He was arrested, finally, in 1958 when his second known victim was found hanging by the ankles in the barn behind his house, naked and gutted like a deer. So,
oh, God.
So, films like Psycho, Silence of the Lambs, and this were inspired by him, albeit, they kind of like picked and choose which parts they wanted to adapt,
Oh, they absolutely do. Yes. And Trace, I'm going to make one quick correction.
Yeah.
So the cannibalism is an alleged thing and it's not proven.
Got it. That's the thing, though. A lot of stuff about him seems to be... So, okay, important to note, Gein never used a chainsaw.
Nope.
The chainsaw came from Hooper when he was in the hardware section of a busy store contemplating on how to speed his way through the crowd, which...
Oh,
okay.
God.
But yes, only 2 confirmed murders with 7 suspected murders, but again, not confirmed, and he mutilated 9 corpses from the graves he dug up.
Yeah.
So that was piece number 1. Hooper also wanted to do something about a dysfunctional family because that was also something going on culturally and politically at the time. So I won't go too deep into this, but generally speaking, this is a time when people were living together before marriage. Divorce rates were on the rise. People didn't trust their government because we were in the throes of the Vietnam War.
Mm-hmm.
Child abuse was something that wasn't really dealt with until the 1970s, and you see the product of that in the form of Leatherface and the Sawyer family. So also by 1973, the news was suddenly showing viewers things that they were not used to seeing on TV. So, like war atrocities or people setting themselves on fire on people's TVs for the first times ever. So it was basically like they were watching snuff films on TV.
Yeah, it's basically how we traumatize an entire generation of people. And then it's like, oh, let's spend the 80s talking about therapy.
Yes. And so that element, carries over to the film with the radio broadcasts that play throughout the film's runtime. But from there, it was simple, a dysfunctional, murderous family themed after the crimes of Ed Gein and an unlucky van full of teenagers that stumbles across their house. And interestingly enough, and this documentary kind of says this, but I'm always loath to say it's the first one to do it. So I'm going to say it was one of the first horror films to really focus on teenagers.
Oh, which is also a very weird thing because Gein notoriously only went after older women. Those are his victims because he was basically just trying to get closer to his mom, aka Psycho. But yeah, the teenager aspect is very interesting in this film because it feels like another very obvious way of saying, oh, well, who goes to see horror films? Or how do I attract people with lots of disposable income? Yeah. Well, totally. Let's populate the movie with hotties.
Yeah. It's also incredibly smart because I think the youth were
oh yeah,
like a big, threat to the system, right? The quote unquote system at this point in time, because they were seeing what were happening to their friends in Vietnam and they were completely disillusioned. And even like we see in this film, a rise in occultism and, the astrology aspect. And we see a rise in cults during this time and drug use and all of that stuff. There really was this really invigorated youth culture, which was really unsettling for kind of the status quo for a lot of older generations. And I think that is definitely seeping in here. But it is so funny to think about it in context of the horror genre and just knowing where this is going to go.
Right.
Because
You're
it's
like, oh, teenagers, what a novelty in a horror film.
Right.
And that's the thing, because I feel like, when we're talking about, the birth of the slasher film, like it really does fall on Halloween shoulders a lot. And then, of course, like Friday the 13th for popularizing it. But within a month of each other, in 1974, both the Texas Chainsaw Massacre and Bob Clark's Black Christmas were released.
Yeah.
Like this is still considered the prototype of the generic phase for the slasher film. But yeah, it's like Psycho, those two texts, and then, Halloween comes along and just sort of cements everything. But we give all the credit to Halloween.
Well, because I think also Halloween was critically loved in a way that Texas Chainsaw Massacre and I guess Black Christmas too at the time were not.
Yeah.
But, okay, so while Hooper and Henkel were writing the script, which went under multiple working titles, including Head Cheese and just simply Leatherface, Hooper and Henkel formed a production company called Vortex Incorporated, with Henkel as president and Hooper as vice president. And they asked their friend Bill Parsley for funding, and this Parsley guy... I love that parsley. Sorry, I got hungry. He created the investor corporation MAB Inc., through which he invested $60,000 in the film, which is roughly $370,000 today.
Okay.
Now, this is all really important, even though it doesn't sound like it yet. But the deal was struck that Vortex and MAB would each own 50% of the film and its profits. But if they needed any more money, they would have to sell their portion of the interest. So,
oh no.
Put that in your back pocket. We're going to come back to it in a minute.
That's where all the money gets made.
So, okay, with casting, they turned to the Texas Film Commission and got most of the actors from there. And most of the actors were noting, like, it was really nice to be like, I don't have to go to LA to audition. Like, we can just film something in Texas where I live. That's awesome. Gunnar Hansen auditioned for Leatherface and even went to a special needs school and walked across the campus for 2 days to mimic them.
Yeah.
He basically said he didn't want to leave until people at the facility couldn't tell if he was a patient there or not.
Oh, no.
Okay, so we're doing a little bit method. We wouldn't do it the same way now.
Maybe not for this, but I mean, I don't know. I'm going back to that Wait Until Dark. Well, I guess that was also the past, but where it's like Audrey Hepburn went to a blind school to learn how to be blind, for lack of a better phrase.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, though, when Hansen auditioned, they told him, sorry, dude, we've already cast the role of Leatherface, so you're shit out of luck.
Oops.
Luckily for him, that actor they cast got drunk in his motel room during pre-production and wouldn't come out, so they desperately reached out to Hansen to fill the spot.
Wow. Can you imagine being that person who's like, yeah, I went on a bender, missed out on the opportunity to be in this low budget, or oh, fuck, it's the Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Yeah.
But that's the thing, though. Like, no one involved in the production of this movie, except maybe Hooper and Henkel, thought anyone was ever going to see this movie.
Wow. Okay.
Classic story, right?
Right.
Yeah. But to keep costs down, so we're going back to money here, Hooper and Henkel convinced their participants, so both the cast and the crew, to defer their salary until a distribution deal was struck. So what they did was they awarded everyone points. And this is something that I had never heard of before, but it's similar to mortgage points. Also something I'm not so familiar with because I don't have a house, but nevertheless, the shares offered were anywhere between 0.25% to 6%. However, here's the thing. These points were not taken from the total gross that the film would make, as some participants believed, but from Vortex's 50% ownership of the picture. So, when the actors were given points, they thought they were being given points in the film, but what they were actually being given was points in a company that owns points in the film. And so, at this point, their points, and I say at this point specifically...
Take a drink every time Trey says point.
Yeah, their point. Oh my god! At this point, their points were worth half of the assumed value.
Yeah, fuck.
Okay, so they rent some filming equipment and begin shooting on July 15th of 1973, and this film shoot lasts for 32 days. And The film shoot was described as desperate and murderous. They filmed basically because Hooper didn't want to go beyond his rental time with the equipment. They filmed 7 days a week for 12 to 16 hours per day in the Texas summer.
No.
Because they had no money, everyone wore the same costume for all that time.
Of course.
This includes Hansen's Leatherface, which they refused to wash because it was their only one, and they were afraid of it changing colors or worse, being ruined when they cleaned it. So he wore the same clothes for 16 hours a day for 30 days in the Texas summer, and
oh boy.
During this summer, temperatures sometimes got as high as 110 degrees Fahrenheit or 43 degrees Celsius for the Canadians in the room.
Yeah. Now, Trace, tell us about the animal parts, because that's also contributing to the smell-o-vision.
Well, that's because, one of the makeup artists, Dorothy Pearl, and I couldn't figure out if she was related to cinematographer Daniel Pearl, but she worked at a vet office and had access, and she says, I had access to a boneyard. And
gross.
They just had the production designer and the art director go and with a sack and just pick up animal bones. But they also went around looking for roadkill. So this is all real shit they're using in the movie.
Oh my God. The production is almost more terrifying than the movie itself.
Yes.
It just seems so unhygienic as well, right?
And you're not getting paid. You're not getting paid. You're dealing with all of this stuff. Just wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Which I guess in hindsight, you're like, oh, it's just quote unquote 30 days. It's a month of my life. But still,
that's brutal.
Yeah, well, and here's the thing. So at the start of every day, Hooper and Henkel would plan out their shots for a long time in the morning, which meant that they got later starts on some days. And so production slipped further and further behind schedule as they were shooting.
Right, of course.
Nevertheless, all these factors in play, it all seemed mostly fine, but there were obviously bad days, for example, Paul Partain, who plays Franklin, the last scene he shot was actually his first scene where he has to pee in a coffee can on the side of the road. The production owed him a couple $100, and he didn't believe the film would ever go out, and thus didn't think he'd ever get the money as this, deal that he had made with the company.
Right.
So he basically just said, I'm not filming this until you cut me a check for something.
Anything. Give me anything.
Because it's his first scene, it's well, we can't just recast you at this point.
Yeah.
Right.
But following the production, the movie was in the editing room for a year, possibly more. Hooper cut the film in his living room, and right next to that room was a little room where he had the musical instruments. So he scored in one room and cut in the other. I just have this image of him just moving back and forth, back and forth, back and forth.
Just fiddling with it for a year.
Well, speaking of the score, though, so this movie doesn't really have one. And Rachel, you can quibble with me in a minute. I just want to say, though, what it has sound design. And apparently a very early case of sound design, as that term wasn't really used often, if at all, at this point in the film business. The instrumentation, though, was a lot of toys. Hooper was really interested in experimental sound. And so for a while, he just found a bunch of different items and objects to make sounds with, including he name dropped an African metal string instrument that had a tambourine fixed on it. So he would saw it by putting as much pressure on the strings as he could, so you can hear the individual increments of the bow slipping across the strings. And then while he did that, the tambourine stuff would shake. And so it was just a lot of what sound, get the ice, let's make some ice sounds, and things like that.
Oh, it's fascinating the way he approached this, because I feel like horror scores a lot of times get a bad rap because this is what people think of when they think of horror scores, is this kind of sound a lot of the times, because we, especially there are composers who kind of specialize in this, like Joseph Bashara or Mark Corvin. Joseph Bashara did The Conjuring and Malignant and those films, and then Mark Corvin, who The Witch and Cube and those kind of things. And so it's still incredibly popular. But building instruments using weird extended techniques on other instruments. I think in one thing, Wayne Bell, who he made the music with, talked about, using a prepared piano and just torturing these instruments to get these sounds out of them. And the way they did it was also kind of non-traditional. So I think a lot of composers traditionally score to picture. They have the visuals and then they react with the music, right? And create it for that scene, or vice versa, or make the music and then they somehow fit it in there. But here they sort of reverse engineered it. So I found this incredible interview with Wayne Bell. He did it with Charlie Brigden for The Quietus, and he talked about how he created a library of sounds first, like just made a bunch of noises, recorded them,
Right.
did not even know what they were going to be attached to, and then went through and put them in the picture. Was just like, okay, I think this will go here, this will go here. So it really was like a puzzle. Just like, what do we have? What makes sense? And put those pieces in there without necessarily having known what the visual would be before you made the sound, if that makes sense.
Right. So it was just, this sound is working for me and we will see if we can fit it in somewhere, but we don't know where yet.
We don't know where, but the sound is weird and creepy and gross and scary, and we're going to keep it and find a place for it later. So I'm sure there was tons they didn't even use.
Oh absolutely. But I think that's also why this post-production process took like a year or more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I found this quote I can read from Wayne Bell that I thought was really fascinating. So he said, both Toby and I loved that boundary between music and sound. That wonderful mushy gray area between is it music or is it just sound is an area we loved playing in, and it's an important component of what we were doing. So there becomes some indistinction, and that you, the audience, don't know is just fine. So I think he's talking about like that indistinction between, is this actually happening in the scene? Is this like a diegetic sound? Is this the hen? Or is this, and like the overlapping of the dialogue and the score, like the mix is also really interesting, I guess is the right word.
and I think, you know how I said earlier, like, I think there's something I noticed more in every rewatch of this, and I think a lot of it comes from the sound and not the visuals.
Oh, so much. And because, I mean, even in the very beginning, you hear things before you actually see anything.
Right.
And I feel like that carries so much weight in this movie, is just how they were using sound to kind of make up for the fact that it's not that gory, but we're going to make you think something horrific is happening just with these incredible, crazy sounds that we're using. And you're always going to be caught off balance because you're never really sure where something's placed, and the panning and the layers and the textures and stuff. It's so effective. And I think that is incredible. And also, they came up with some cool sounds, right? Like the camera sound. I mean, iconic.
I mean, it's so iconic. They used it in the trailer for the remake.
Yeah. And you know what I love? He's never revealed how he made that sound.
So that is not an actual sound of like a Polaroid or something.
Well, maybe it is, but he's never confirmed it. He's never said anything. I've also found a quote from this. He said, ultimately, anybody could figure out how it was done and repeat it, but I think it would be a kindness, certainly a respect for what we did and the effectiveness of it, to leave that sound with chainsaw, a tip of the hat, and not applying it to this and that other use. I certainly have no control over that, but it would be kind of nice to leave that sound in our collective cultural memory. As the centuries go on, that sound belongs to chainsaw.
He's like, hey, cunts, hands off. This is my sound effect.
He's never said how he uses it or like how he made it.
I would do the exact same thing if I were in his position, because truthfully, like, Hooper's career is probably one of the more rocky ones when compared to his...
He had some up and downs,
let's keep his stuff here sacrosanct, like, absolutely.
Yeah. It's just like, you know, usually people are pretty open. I just love that. Never to this day, he's like, nope, I'm not doing it. That's my sound. I'm keeping it.
So, okay. Ultimately, though, while Hooper is editing, the production ran out of funds, and Hinkle and Hooper had to sell yet more shares in Vortex, their production group. They went to this production company called Pie in the Sky, who provided $23,532, which is about $145,000 today, in exchange for a percentage of Vortex, leaving Hinkle, Hooper, and the rest of the cast and crew with a 40.5% stake in the film.
Ooh, so they've lost almost 10%.
Well, and here's the thing. The cast still doesn't know about the 50% thing.
Right,
so,
oh, God.
Like, everyone still thinks they're getting that full percentage. So... then it came time to find a distributor, because again, that was the deferment. Like, hey, you won't get paid until we get a distributor. So they screened the film for most of the major studios, and none of them were interested in it. Enter Bryanston Films, who watched it and said they would buy it on the spot. Now,
okay.
For anyone who listened to our episodes on Flesh for Frankenstein, or to a lesser extent Blood for Dracula, this company should sound familiar to you, and it's because they distributed those films, and they were mafia.
Oh, no.
Mafia.
Okay, so enter Warren Scarron, who, Joe, we just talked about in our Beetlejuice episode because he was the co-writer of that film.
Oh, right. Yeah, yeah.
But at the time, he was the head of the Texas Film Commission, the only one that was like getting all like the actors and stuff, auditions for the film. He helped secure this distribution deal with Bryanston. And so we also have a man, new name, David Foster, who would later produce The Thing in 1982 for Carpenter. But he arranged a private screening for some of Bryanston's West Coast executives. And just for doing that, he got 1.5% of Vortex's profits and a deferred fee of $500, which is about $3,100 today. So again, we're chipping away at that percentage that Vortex has.
Oh my God.
Okay. On August 28th, 1974, Louis Pereno of Bryanston, again, we discussed him in Flesh of Frankenstein, but he agreed to distribute the film worldwide, from which Skarin and the film's production manager, Ron Bosman, would receive $225,000, or about $1.4 million, and 35% of the profits. Okay, how many percentages have we thrown out, right? Like, who even knows who's getting what at this point? So,
math is not my specialty.
Exactly.
I don't think it's a lot.
No.
It's left over.
So, okay, but the film comes out, because, again, like, Pereno saw this in, August of 74. The film has its premiere October 1st of 1974 in Austin, Texas. Any Austinites out there, it premiered at the Village Cinema, which is now the Alamo Drafthouse Village, but fun stuff. The marketing leaned heavily on the based on a true story concept, with one of the taglines on the poster being, "What happened is true, now the motion picture that's just as real." But, and here's the funny thing, Hooper was spreading intentional misinformation because, in his words, it was a response to being lied to by the government about things that were going on all over the world, including Watergate, the 1973 oil crisis, and the massacres and atrocities in the Vietnam War.
Hell yeah, Hooper. Hell yeah.
I mean, he and John Carpenter are probably our most politically active genre filmmakers. Like, maybe ever? Him, Carpenter, Romero. There we go.
Yeah.
The trifecta.
Yeah. I mean, I would even say Wes Craven gets there, with things like People Under the Stairs.
Yeah, but not to the same degree.
Not as openly, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. Which, again, I always think it's funny because when that remake was coming out, like, people kept being like, oh, yeah, like, I know about this family in Texas. Like, like, I hear stories about it. And it's like, none of that's true, people.
No.
There's no family in Texas.
But I know. I heard it from a friend of mine and her aunt.
That Mandela effect. But yeah, so this does get an R rating in the States after cutting a few things, and it was initially given an X rating. Funnily enough, and I had heard this before, Hooper reportedly hoped that the MPAA would give the complete uncut release print a PG rating because there was no gore in it.
I mean, that is hilariously delusional.
Well, but apparently that's part of the reason, again, this is all like hearsay, but like that's part of the reason why he chose to not film any gore, because he was hoping for that PG rating.
Can you imagine, like, a 10-year-old?
I mean, Rachel, would you take one of your young charges that you were babysitting to go and see the Texas Chain Saw Massacre?
And also, just to clarify, I would watch the movies after they went to bed.
Sure,
I'm not that kind of babysitter.
Rachel's like, I was not Laurie Stroding this, I swear.
Now, however, though, while the U.S. was apparently fine with this movie, elsewhere in the world, the censors were not as lenient. So, for example, I'll provide one. In 1975, the British Board of Film Censors refused to grant Texas Chain Saw Massacre a theatrical certificate, with the BBFC secretary James Furman commenting that the film seemed like, and I quote, the pornography of terror.
Oh my God. But also, what a great fucking quote. Like, how do you not put that onto the poster?
Mm-hmm. But here's the funny thing. He then went through the movie to see what should be cut to get it approved and discovered that there was no individual scene or shot that was deemed unacceptable. It was rather the massive cumulative frenzy of the film that was unacceptable. So, as such, because they couldn't cut anything, this film remained on the BBFC blacklist for 23 years until Furman retired in 1998, and his replacements, Robin Duvall and Andreas Whitten Smith, decided, Texas Chain Saw Massacre is no longer a threat to decent society, and then they eventually granted an 18 certificate for the uncut version of the film.
That was wild. Can you imagine having to wait out some asshole with a personal vendetta? Like, all we gotta do is wait for him to retire. It's gonna happen one of these years.
I just like social decency. Like, fuck off. But the film, for the most part, got decent reviews, and it made lots of money. But according to Bryanston's reports, after the investors recouped their money with interest, and after Scarron, the lawyers, and the accountants were paid, only $5,734, which is about $30,000 today, was left to be divided among the 20 cast and crew members.
No.
Wow.
This is really interesting because I was like looking at the cast and kind of, just contemplating. Like, I really wonder why more of these people did do more.
They don't act after this.
Some of them did, but some of them did not.
Yeah.
Or nothing like outside of the Hooperverse, right? And so now it's starting to make sense. Maybe they didn't have the best experience.
Well, and that's the thing. And of course, they all come. I think the convention. I think the convention circuit actually kind of brought them around to a lot because the woman that plays Pam, like she apparently would refuse to be associated with this movie up until the film's 40th anniversary, which was 10 years ago.
Yeah. Interesting.
Now, here's the thing. So it was at this point that everyone learned that Vortex did not own the film 100%. Supposedly, the final budget was about $125,000, and seemingly, because there's no actual gross of record for this movie because Bryanston's reporting was so shady and the accounting side.
Wow. The mob. They're skimming off the top.
But everyone involved with this film seems to think that it made over $100 million over the course of 2 or 3 years after it hit the drive-in circuit.
Wow.
But the true gross is not known. But anyway, obviously they were all pissed. So art director and production designer Robert Burns, he's the guy who went to the boneyard to get up all the animal bones. He got a crew together and flew to New York to confront Louis Perrano, who, by the way, his name apparently was Lou Piranha because he was an asshole. When they walked into his office, it looked like a scene from The Godfather, with Perrano flanked on each side by 2 henchmen. And they demanded to see the books and threatened to sue them if they didn't. And Perrano told Burns, and I quote, "You don't have enough balls to sue me."
Oh, boy.
Yes. So that all seemingly wouldn't matter because by the time they did sue Bryanston in May of 1976, so almost
they actually follow through.
Oh yeah, they do. But here's the thing: Bryanston was apparently broke by this point, and so
come on.
Now that's the thing. Yes, I was like, they probably again moved the books around to feign brokenness and but nevertheless, rather than force them into bankruptcy, the Texans settled for an out-of-court payment in February of 1977 for $400,000 for their share of profits, and however, this also meant that they would relinquish control of the movie. Now,
oh no,
$400,000 is about $2.5 million today, so that's split between the 20 cast and crew members. So they got something, but definitely, I would say, not what they deserved, given what they thought the deal was.
Right, and then they also gave up the rights. Does that end up coming back to hurt them too?
I don't think it matters. Basically, because in 1983, New Line Cinema acquired the distribution rights from Bryanston and gave the producers a larger share of the profits. But that's another one of those things where it's it's like the Chucky Child's Play thing, where it's someone has the rights to Texas Chainsaw Massacre and someone has the rights to Leatherface the character or the name.
Right.
Yeah, okay.
Okay. That's why we get Leatherface movies and not Texas Chainsaw Massacre movies.
Exactly. And now I won't go too much into the legacy of the film because I feel like that's what we're going to be discussing for the whole plot summary, but I will say Hooper brooded for years that no one appreciated or saw the comedy in Texas Chainsaw Massacre. He says it took 8 years before people started noticing it, which is why we get Hooper's sequel, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre Part 2, 12 years later in 86, which of course put a much heavier emphasis on dark comedy, and he was working with a much bigger budget, $4.5 million instead of $100,000.
And you can tell because that movie looks quite a bit more expensive.
Oh, and it's one of the most intense tonal swings from one film to the next sequel of all time. It's jarring.
Gremlins to Gremlins 2.
Yeah.
But more than that, it's even a step further than that, I think, because you're using puppets and stuff. The Gremlins themselves, I feel like there's a level of kitsch to them, but man, it's a big jump from this one to the second one, which obviously we see even Evil Dead 2 and those kind of ones. It's not the only one, but
yeah, Evil Dead 2 is probably a really good comparison for that too. Yeah, but yeah, can you imagine the audience in '86 going to see the Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2 and they get that.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, come on, you've got that Breakfast Club poster, and I don't know if that was the original poster or if it just comes out later, but I look at that and I'm just like, that poster is telling you what you need to know. If you're paying attention, you know what you're in for.
Well, but I just think in 86, I mean, the internet didn't exist. People couldn't talk about it that way. You couldn't read up on it that way. But but oh God, what would it have been like if we would get a sequel to the remake that was done Texas Chain Saw Massacre 2 style? I would just love that.
Can you imagine?
So much.
That would kind of be amazing.
Who would be the Dennis Hopper role today? Who is that?
I don't know.
Oh,
at that level, though?
I know.
At that level of respectedness.
Yeah.
It would have, it'd probably be, honestly, it'd probably be Russell Crowe.
Yeah.
I mean, he's had he's probably up for it at this point.
At this point, yeah. If you flash a big enough paycheck, man, he will come a-running.
Yeah. But nevertheless, yeah. So, but I guess I didn't say.
I just thought about it. It's Nicolas Cage.
Yes.
Oh my God, that is it. That's it. That is it.
That's it.
Oh, and he would nail it. Why isn't this happening?
You know what? Everyone, manifest this shit.
Because that's the thing. That remake made over $100 million on a $9 million budget.
So it's still one of the biggest of the remakes in the 2000s. Yeah.
I mean, I would argue that film is almost single-handedly responsible for the 2000s remake boom.
A lot of it. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. But yeah, I guess I didn't really go over the actual stats for reviews, but just as a heads up, we're looking at an 89% on Rotten Tomatoes with an average score of 8.2 out of 10, whereas Letterboxd users have this at a 7.6 out of 10, which, Joe, weren't we just talking about how something below an 8 for a film like this is way too low?
It is. It's way too low. I mean, I think even if you say, I don't particularly enjoy this movie or I find it too upsetting or challenging to watch, which are all totally valid responses, I don't think you can quibble with this film. It's a masterpiece.
I know. This is definitely one of those films that it's this is a 5-star film, but also I don't necessarily enjoy it. And those two things can exist in the same space.
Yeah.
But okay, Joe, what happens in this movie?
Oh boy. Okay, here we go. So the film begins with a disclaimer and a statement, which is read by an uncredited John Larroquette,
who apparently was paid in marijuana for his role.
I love that.
You know what? Good for him.
1974, baby.
Truly. Pay me in grass. Okay, so then we see a date. It is August 18th, 1973, and we have this black screen, which is punctuated by camera flashes of gore.
Yeah, there's so much sound. Because, Rachel, you mentioned this, how we hear things before we actually see something, but, there's squelching going on, and mixed with, the digging sounds. Because I feel like what we're hearing is the hitchhiker digging up a corpse, right? That is what we're hearing, or meant to be hearing.
Mm-hmm.
But it's gross.
Yeah, it sets the stage just to let you know that this movie is going to be an experience, right? You don't just watch this movie, you feel this movie. It plays with all of your senses in such a fascinating way. This is a movie. Now that we have the technology, right? The 4DX technology. Can you imagine seeing this? 4DX with the smells the moistness and the heat and all of that stuff that they could simulate, because I feel this film, and you get that from that very opening crawl and those sounds and that first shot of the graveyard. It's just, okay, this is the ride we're in for.
The extreme close-up on the corpse we get, it's it's just so gooey. It's a gooey looking skeleton.
Truly. Yeah, you would expect that something that's been buried underground to be rotting, but this looks like it's been put through some kind of chemical waste or something. It's just so icky, gooey, nasty.
I did want to point out, and this is something that someone, because there's another new documentary on the legacy of the film that's on that new 4K with a bunch of our peers on it.
Okay.
I think it's Heather Wixson that points out where it's so many, in today's spoiler-averse culture, it's interesting because the opening scroll for this film tells you pretty much all these kids are going to die. And so it's there's no what's going to happen? You just know, and it adds to the dread of the film.
And it's not just what they're telling you, it's the word choices.
Yeah.
The fact that, it's not very it's not just a matter of fact sort of crawl. Like it kind of has that sort of news feel where it's like, this is based on a truth. But then it's talking about how the life was snuffed from them and they're, and it's also kind of flowery and dramatic at the same time.
It's purple prose, yeah.
Well, but I think also because this does at times feel like a true crime documentary.
Oh, yes. Yes.
Which is, again, given the time period, is fascinating. But I think that adds to the kind of unease of it, where it's like, I don't feel like I'm watching a movie anymore. I feel like I'm watching real life.
Oh, yeah. And you think like this was an age, like I'm sure, Joe, like you're going to talk about this all the time on Murder Made Fiction, but this was a time when serial killers could exist. We don't necessarily have that as much anymore because of just the nature of technology and the world that we live in. But I mean, I can imagine so many people thinking that this actually happened because this was so much more believable because it was happening. It was happening a lot.
Well, and what's interesting is that we don't actually have the term serial killer. Like that's actually not invented as a construct until like the late 70s, early 80s. But everybody knew about Gein.
Right.
So, this film doesn't advertise itself as that kind of based on a true story, but like it does at the same time. It's having it both ways because Hooper is sensational and he knew how to market this motherfucker. But if you knew Gein or if you were following these kinds of stories, you would look at this and say, oh, wow, this does feel ripped from the headlines. Like it's one of the originals.
Oh, yeah. And you have to think like, was it Manson and, all those murders? That was like 69, right? Yeah. So this stuff is in like at the height of its, I think, public fear.
We're terrified of this shit.
Yeah.
Okay, so we are fading in on this story about grave robbing. We're outside of Newt, Texas. And Trace, as you mentioned, we've got this gooey skeleton being framed at the edge of the cemetery. And then we get credits, and it's all doom and gloom. The world is a garbage shit place. So we learn about fires, a cholera epidemic, violence sparked by a suicide. And then just to really drive this home, let's fade in on a dead armadillo.
I know. I hate it.
Apparently this was supposed to be a dog in the script, but they could not, like they couldn't just like find a dead dog, I guess, which I was
darn.
Well, what about that vet? But basically, that production designer and art director, he found a dead armadillo in the road and he took it home and he got a book about how to do taxidermy and taxidermied it for the opening scene.
Jeez, okay.
Dedicated. These people were dedicated. I will have to give them that.
Yeah.
But also, this feels, and Trace, you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but this feels more appropriately Texas. Like, it feels like it's setting a different kind of stage than just, oh, it's a dead dog in the road.
Yeah, I feel like armadillo. I mean, they're not exclusively native to Texas, I'm sure, but I mean,
I've never seen one.
I mean, but I've seen I guess I've only seen an armadillo in Texas, but I guess I also don't I don't just see a lot of armadillos,
Wait, you don't step outside your door and just see an army of armadillos everywhere?
No, you know what though? I'm lying. There have been armadillos in like the flower beds around my apartment. Well, back when I lived in Austin, around the apartment. But it's like, I mean, they're so dark, you can't see them. I always thought it was a raccoon or something, but every now and then, you would get that silhouette of the armadillo.
Kind of cool. Kind of fun.
Yeah, it's fun. Also, I want to say, if you do live in or around Austin, you can go to a lot of these filming locations. So you can go to the cemetery. You can go to the house, although it's moved. I think it's in Kingsland now and it's a restaurant. But you can go to a lot of these filming locations and it's really cool.
Oh, of course, yeah. I imagine there's a whole... It's weird to call it murder tourism because it's not real, at least not in Texas, but, it's that combination of murder tourism mixed with shooting locations.
Yeah, I think it's like at austintexas.gov. It's one of the government websites. It's probably from this Texas Film Commission, but you can go and go through the different movies and look at all the filming locations. So, of course, a bunch of Linklater films, a bunch of Robert Rodriguez films, so you can go find the faculty filming locations. But, of course, a lot of them are for Texas Chain Saw Massacre, the original, the sequel, and the remake. A lot of these are in and around Austin.
See, again, if I was like Terry McMinn and I feel like I got the short shrift in terms of proceeds from the film, if I didn't get those residuals or those profit points, and then I'm looking at the level of tourism for the film, I'd be like, where is my money?
Yeah.
Okay, so we're introduced to our group. They are driving a green van, and they're parked on the side of the road as Franklin Hardesty, who is played by Paul A. Partain. So he is disabled. He's in a wheelchair, and he is relieving himself on the side of the road, but he gets thrown into the underbrush when a truck sprays him with debris.
Do we want to talk about Franklin and how people think about him?
I'm actually going to suggest that people who don't like this character shut the fuck up and listen to Nicole Goebel's piece on this. She is a huge advocate for the Franklin character, so go and listen to Bodies of Horror because she has an entire episode dedicated just to this character.
I second that. It's a great episode. And yeah, this character does get a lot of hate.
I don't understand it. I literally do not. It's not as though he's worse than any of the other characters. He's a little peculiar, but I actually feel like he's a better depiction of a kind of horror fan than a lot of other people get represented as.
This is, yeah, I mean, here's the thing. Do I find Franklin to be an annoying character sometimes? Yes. But I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing because I also think he is trying to be annoying. And I felt better about it when I was like watching some of these interviews of the cast and crew. Now, granted, this is like in the year 2000, so, you know, things have changed a little bit. Mm-hmm. But like even Marilyn Burns is like, oh no, like again, we all got along really well, but I'm supposed to be really annoyed with Franklin, and like so that actor like did a lot to get on my nerves. So when you see me yelling at him, I'm not acting. But at the same time, I think Hooper says this, you know, like the way people in wheelchairs were treated at that time, like we threw them to the side, like people didn't care about them. And you see that reflected a lot in how Franklin is treated in the movie. But he's also the big proxy for the audience in that he is how we can tell how hot and gross everything is because he's the one that's constantly reacting to it.
Yeah, he's very uncomfortable.
And that I think he's very in line with literally everything else that's happening in the movie. Like this whole movie is intent on unsettling you. And Franklin does that because the way he's speaking, and yes, he can be a little obnoxious, but that's the point. Yeah. You're never supposed to get comfortable in this film. And he, when we're hanging out with those kids, is that catalyst that's keeping us from getting too comfortable.
Well, I'm going to tell you right now, disabled or not, all these people that complain about him and bitch about him and whatever, I would love to see you be in his position in this movie and not complain about the heat.
Well, okay, so it's that, but then also I think what I get upset about, and again, why I would refer people to Nicole's episode, is it that you don't like the way he talks about certain things, or is it like, oh, he's whiny? Because like, when all of the able-bodied people leave him to go and explore the house and he is just down on the bottom floor in a wheelchair and he can't move around, like, that's not being whiny. That's an accessibility issue. And I know that this is a very, like, oh, it's a 2024 kind of lens and we weren't always thinking about that. But it's like, just check yourself when you're thinking about why do I not like this character and in what moments. So with that said, yes, he does end up taking a header into the ditch, which would totally suck in a fucking Austin heat wave and you're trying to get back into your chair. So
I think he spills the pee all over himself too.
Probably. Yeah, it's just going to make things worse. So but we do end up getting back on the road. So we've got Pam, Terry McMinn, who is talking to us about horoscopes, including Jerry, who is our driver, played by Alan Danziger.
How old is that guy? That guy looks like he's 50 years old.
Okay, but I feel like everyone in this time period looked about 20 years older than they actually were.
100%.
I don't know.
That guy, Jerry especially, though.
I feel like the girls and Kirk look in their early 20s, and then I do feel like Franklin and Jerry definitely look like they're in their early to mid 30s.
Rough time for some of the male fashions, I think.
Well, there's that too. Yeah. Okay, so we do see residents camped around another cemetery as Sally Hardesty. So this is our heroine, protagonist, final girl, played by Marilyn Burns.
Okay, but kind of, though. Actually, one thing I love about the structure of this film, because we don't have like the tropes of the slasher yet, right?
Right.
Sally isn't even the protagonist until she's the only one left.
Yeah. She's the like lead protagonist just by default.
By default, yeah.
Because she's certainly not the focus of the first part of the movie.
Correct, no, but this feels a little like, okay, maybe Ridley Scott is going to take a page from this where we get to Ripley, right? Where we kind of distract, the person that you think is going to be the lead gets killed off, and then all of a sudden it's this other person. Again, it's a psycho approach too.
Yeah.
Okay, so Sally asks about her grandfather's corpse, which is part of the reason why we're taking this drive. So we've heard rumors that corpses are being dug up. Also, we do have a family home that we want to go and check on. So we're making this road trip as a group. And also, we're going to smoke a little grass. We're going to hit the road, probably drink a little, and so on. So back on the road, we are also talking about the slaughterhouse because there is a famous history here, right? This was a captain of industry where, grandfather was involved in the slaughterhouse, but it's been hit hard by economic times.
And it's so funny because I find like I always forget about this stuff every time I rewatch the movie. And I remember when I first saw it when I was a teenager, I was like, oh, this is so boring. Like, why aren't they like getting chopped up yet? Blah, blah, blah. But all of this is such like, as I've gotten older, I really have learned to appreciate the kind of like we're not just dropping exposition in this movie. We're just like hanging out with these characters who are reading their horoscopes for like 10 minutes.
Well, I would actually argue that we are doing exposition because, this is the other reason I like Franklin is because he is ushering in some of these ideas that anticipate the arrival of the Slaughter family. So when he's talking about, how we kill cows now with sledgehammers and it takes multiple blows, it's like, okay, well, that'll come into effect. But also we're laying out the groundwork from an economic capitalist point of view, because this movie is very much a dissection of, well, what happens when you take the jobs away? People become desperate and they resort to desperate acts.
Yeah. I also love the slaughterhouse thing because I think it's a really smart way to kind of highlight the way that people, you see what you want to see, right? And you accept what you want to accept. And I mean, that's like the biggest thing with meat eating. I mean, I'm a vegetarian and I've been vegetarian since I was 16 years old. Once I learned about what he's talking about. Maybe it was actually this movie that I started thinking about these things. I'm not sure. But it's kind of one of those things like when you think about it, you're like, God, that's horrific. Like, I don't want to do that. I don't want to participate in that. But you even see, I can't remember which one of the women says like, I like meat. I don't want to think about this. And you just don't think about that. And that's also very similar, I think, to sort of what's happening in this community, right? Like this whole industry got shut down and all these people are out of work and all of that sort of stuff. But you just don't want to think about it because like that's sad and that's a bummer. And I just can't take that on right now. So I'm just not going to think about it. And that doesn't mean it's not happening. You're just putting on blinders. And I think that's a huge part of this. And that's such an interesting way to plant those seeds so early. Also, it's just gross. So that it works on that level too.
Yeah, we're anticipating we're planting images in our head. And then when they come to pass, but now we're seeing it happen to humans and we're properly horrified. It's like, oh, well, we also do this to animals.
The new psychological thriller Apartment 7A is now streaming on Paramount+. Julia Garner stars as a struggling young dancer who suffers a devastating injury. Soon, she finds herself drawn in by dark forces when a peculiar, well-connected older couple promises her a shot at fame. Diane Wiest, Kevin McNally, and Jim Sturgis also star in the Paramount Plus original movie. Buy Apartment 7A on digital or stream it now on Paramount Plus. Rated R. Head to ParamountPlus.com/Apartment7A to try it free.
When you need mealtime inspiration, it's worth shopping Kroger for thousands of appetizing ingredients that inspire countless mouth-watering meals. And no matter what tasty choice you make, you'll enjoy our everyday low prices. Plus, extra ways to save, like digital coupons worth over $600 each week and up to $1 off per gallon at the pump with points. So you can get big flavors and big savings. Kroger, fresh for everyone. Fuel restrictions apply.
This is the sound of your ride home with Dad after he caught you vaping. Awkward, isn't it? Most vapes contain seriously addictive levels of nicotine and disappointment. Know the real cost of vapes. Brought to you by the FDA.
Okay, so we're obviously also complaining about the heat because it's very hot. And then this is when we notice there is a hitchhiker who is played by Edwin Neal. And even though he is quote unquote weird looking because it's the fucking 70s and we're all idiots, we stop to pick him up.
Yeah, why? Why would you? That just doesn't seem smart.
But I actually like it though because this endears me to the characters. And granted, of course, in 2024, it's kind of like, oh God,
you brought this on yourself. What are you thinking?
Don't do that. But I think you hear Sally say like, oh, like, it's really hot outside. We should help him. So
yes.
I love that this all comes from like a good deed. But what's that saying? No good deed goes unpunished.
Something like that.
She read their horoscopes. It's not looking good. Saturn's
I was going to say, like,
retrograde
3 out of the 5 of them have bad horoscopes. And I get it. Like horoscopes are a little bit Looney Tunes. There's a lot of people who don't believe in them. We like to make fun of them unless you're a firm believer. But it's like the signs are all there. We're talking about slaughter and you've got a bad horoscope. Let's pick up a strange man.
Mm-hmm. That strange man that
one
clearly has some things going on.
Yeah. I mean, even his own brother. Is he the brother of the cook? Or is he the son of the cook?
The son, right?
The son? I didn't know if they were just all brothers.
It's Leatherface and the hitchhiker are brothers. And then, oh no, it actually is their older brother who is the old man from the gas station.
Oh, okay.
Wait, because they call Grandpa. So, okay, so it's Grandpa. So, okay, whatever. I don't care.
I always thought that was their dad.
I think you're meant to.
Okay,
but yeah,
well.
it's a confusing family relationship, but I think it's by design.
Let's. Oh, wait. The cook. Oh, no.
I was going to say, it's not clear.
It's not important, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so we're already a little bit suspicious about this hitchhiker, but we do pick him up because we're doing a kindness. But almost immediately, things are weird, right? So he and Franklin are bonding over this slaughterhouse practice, and everyone else is just like, can we not? It would be great if we stopped.
Hey, I love the long shot of watching the hitchhiker get in the car because I just think they almost like speed away without him, but then they don't. But then we just cut. It seems like to them just staring at him, like, what did we just pick up?
Yeah, I always took that to mean he probably smells very badly, so we're all trying to crowd to the front of the van to maybe get away from it.
Yeah. And he's got that little pouch that he keeps pulling things out of. It's like made of fur, and you're just like all of a sudden like, oh no, what have we gotten ourselves into
like
here?
The demented Mary Poppins bag of like endless objects.
Yeah.
Oh boy. Yeah. So I'm going to bring in my one reference for the episode. It's Joe Kerr's Slaughterhouse Sexuality, Queering the Sawyer Family in Tobe Hooper's The Texas Chain Saw Massacre from Medium. And one of the early things that Core talks about is the key reasons why this family has turned to murder. So it's partly for profit because, like we're stealing people's cars and their belongings and all that other stuff to make ends meet. But Core says, but it's more so as a release for their violent urges that was at one time sanctioned by their occupation. So again, this is why the slaughterhouse becomes important. So this is established by the hitchhiker who gleefully shows them pictures of his work at the slaughterhouse and then expounds on the benefits of using a hammer to slaughter livestock.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've never thought about it that way, but that makes total sense. Yeah, you lose this outlet. And I think you see that in a lot of other professions, and that's a rabbit hole that I'm not going to go down right now. But I think that is a great way to look at that I've never thought about before.
Yeah. So the hitchhiker does end up stealing Franklin's pocket knife. He slices up his own palm and then reveals he has a straight razor in his shoe. And this is when the Polaroids come out. So it's just... I don't know about you folks, but I've been in a couple of situations with someone who seems utterly unpredictable. And that to me is what is so frightening about the hitchhiker is you really don't know what he's going to do next.
Totally.
It's like, like any societal like rules or considerations we have in place, like they're gone. These people don't recognize those things. And so it's just like, oh, like anything could happen. Also,
you even hear Franklin call that out and just talking about what it takes to do that to yourself, to cut your hand like that. And he's trying to like see, like, just poke at his skin and see what that kind of feels like and realizing, no, I could never do that. Can you do that? Could you do that? And he's like, no, why would I do that? That's insane. And so just really kind of marveling at how unhinged and that this guy would be capable of. I mean, he sets a fire in the van with like gunpowder. Is that what that was?
I wrote fireworks in my notes, but that makes more sense.
Yeah.
And for what purpose? I don't know.
Well,
it's just
because I thought it was like, oh, you don't want to buy this picture? Well, you're not going to get it.
Oh, exactly.
Fuck you.
Totally. But just he doesn't tear it up or throw it out the window.
Right?
It's a firework.
Well, they can go get it.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And then after he burns the picture, that's when he lashes out at Franklin with the straight razor. So it has escalated into pyrotechnics and bloodshed. So this guy's got to go. And I love that he essentially marks the van with his blood as they drive away. And I've always wondered if this was kind of a, okay, hey, family, this is who we're going to go after next. So I'm quite literally marking the food.
So I thought the exact same thing, but at the same time, like, I mean, when we get to the cook in a bit, like, because again, we don't know he's involved in this at this point, but like, he does tell them, don't do that. So It's weird that a member of the family is also the harbinger.
Yeah.
Well, tropes are still in flux, right? So.
Yeah.
I always read it a bit as like baiting the trap, where it's like, okay, well, I'm going to tell them not to do this, and then if they do it,
of course,
then...
yeah. Of course, you tell teens, or young adults, oh, don't do that. That's a bad idea. Of course they're going to do it.
Yeah.
Just that, yeah. So that's our next stop. We do end up needing gas, so we pull into the gas station, but there's no gas, just barbecue. And the old man who works there, who is played by Jim Sydow, he tells them, don't go creeping onto other people's properties. Because, of course, we are here to check on our own property, but, there's a lot of shenanigans that are happening out in the countryside right now. So
that's because we're getting all those radio broadcasts saying all these horrible things that are constantly happening in the area.
Exactly. It honestly reminded me of that terrible Netflix movie that we covered last year, Trace, Leave the World Behind, where you're just like, oh, the world is going to hell in a handbasket. All you need to do is turn on the news.
Oh, wait, the one with, I liked that movie.
Okay, terrible was too strong a word, but it was one of those, like, it wasn't entirely successful, but I like the kind of doom and gloom apocalypse level nature of it.
For sure, absolutely.
Okay, yeah, so this is when Franklin is wondering about the hitchhiker's ability to hurt himself, and I think, again, this gets a little bit of credence why people say, like, oh, Franklin's just a little bit different. He's a little bit weird compared to the rest of the people in the band, but I think when you're exposed to something that makes you question who does that to themselves, like, to me, Franklin has a level of curiosity that I find personally very relatable as a horror fan.
He's also... he's just calling out things that probably everybody's thinking. He's just vocalizing them. And we see that repeated. There's multiple things where he's like, no, we shouldn't do that. Why don't we stay here? He's kind of, in a lot of ways, the voice of reason.
Right.
And I'm probably just thinking about this because Speak No Evil is out. But, kind of those social graces and like, when do you say something? When do you don't? And Franklin kind of doesn't abide by those necessarily. He just says them out loud. He says what's on his mind. And it's not that the other people aren't thinking it. He's just vocalizing it.
And maybe that's why like audience members also gravitate against him, right? Because he's not behaving quote unquote normally, or the way you show a good upstanding member of society should behave. You don't say those things.
Yeah, like we're all thinking it, but stay quiet about it because nobody actually wants to process that.
Yeah.
Which, again, all the people that complain about that are probably the ones that also scream at the movie theater scream during a horror movie. So,
you idiot! Don't go in there.
Why would you do that? Yeah.
That's really the role that Kirk is playing in these scenes. So he's played by William Bale. Gonna go out and say he's the hottest male member of this cast, but he's also kind of the idiot of the group.
A beautiful, beautiful idiot.
He's the sort of most traditional masculine hero kind of guy, which is, I guess, in a way why I'm always like, yeah, of course he and Pam get it first, because they look like the ones who would make it in a contemporary horror film all the way to the end, because they're like the couple and they're hot and...
Yeah, what does he have to be worried about? Yeah, what does he have to be worried about, right? Like, he's got a certain amount of privilege that allows him to just waltz into somebody else's house.
He literally just opens the door and walks down that hall. I'm like... In other versions of this, you would just get shot and people would say, well, you invaded my house.
Yep.
Okay, so we grab some chicken and we hit the road again and we go to Grandpa's place. So Franklin is looking at things like blood stains and the others are checking out the derelict house. This is a little bit of character development just to help us distinguish who is who. But yeah, we absolutely leave Franklin on the ground floor so that we can just go and fuck around.
Yeah, it's really sad. I feel bad for him because they're having fun and they're laughing and we see him dealing with that. But it's like, I think he even says something about how Sally basically encouraged him to come. So he did. And then you just abandon him. It's like, you asked him to be here, like involve him.
Okay, but that's kind of the thing though, because later when it's just Franklin and Sally, like he says like, did you really want me to come here? And I was like, well, okay, so was she not the one that asked you to come? Like
Yeah, but she's not acting like she wants him to be there.
No, yeah,
No.
that's what I'm saying. Like she's acting like he's a problem. He's a burden.
An inconvenience. Yeah.
It strikes me like, hey, I'm going to go on this weekend trip with my friends. I'm using air quotes here. We're going to go check out Grandpa's house, but it's really just an excuse for a road trip. And then it's like, oh, do you want to come along, Franklin? I guess you could. We have room in the van, but it's like, please say no.
But it's like Franklin doesn't want to be there anyway. So I'm just like, did he go because he was doing it for his sister, but his sister who doesn't really even want him there to begin with? So it's like, I don't understand the dynamic there.
Well, it's important to remember, too, that the other four are coupled up. So Franklin is quite literally the odd man out.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, but we do also see bones on the ground and they're hanging in the house. So this is, again, giving us a sort of insidious, creeping nature of how far does the Slaughter family go? Or is it just, oh, okay, we're in the remnants of the slaughterhouse as a kind of capitalist project. So, of course, there's just going to be animal bones all over the place. I assume in Texas, there's just animal bones.
Just everywhere. Yeah. We actually, our tables.
Armadillos and bones.
Yeah, no, we fashion our furniture out of carved bones. Absolutely.
It's still wild to me. It's like the real life case happens in Wisconsin and then we just transport it to the South. I mean, this is a conversation I also have with Jen, but I was like, it just feels like we say, well, they would do something like this in Texas, right? They would eat people in Texas. There would be bones in Texas because it's a Southern convention.
Which is really funny, though, because I think generally the idea was that the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, had a better ring to it than the Wisconsin Chainsaw Massacre.
I mean, absolutely.
But also, I mean, I think because they lived in Texas. It's also the thing, that Texan pride. There's Southern pride, but then there's Texan pride. And I feel like, yeah, if you're going to make a movie, absolutely, you're going to set it in Texas and call it the Texas whatever the fuck.
Right, yeah. Let's do the home state proud.
Yeah.
Okay, so Pam and Kirk decide, hi, we're hot and we want to fuck, so let's absolutely go skinny dipping at the local watering hole. Alas, she is dry. It's just another disappointment that everybody is facing in this movie.
This also, it didn't look like it used to be a watering hole. This just looks like a deep ditch.
I think it probably was.
Well, that can be a watering hole, right?
But yeah, just another way to just really, drive that nail home that this community has been literally just sucked dry.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like there is nothing there. There is no sustenance. Everybody is just dehydrated and the sun is pounded down. Yeah.
Poor Pam should have listened to her horoscope.
Oh, boy.
Yeah.
So they decide, okay, well, we still need gas because we didn't get it at the gas station. So when they see a nearby house in the distance, they think, well, let's go barter for gas. I love the presumptuousness, but sure, youth, yay. So they hoof it on over there. We see a number of hidden cars. It's like a car graveyard, which, of course, in these kinds of movies, it hasn't become a trope yet. But anytime we do a kind of rural horror,
oh yeah,
if we see a bunch of cars, it's, oh shit, these are either cannibals or they are desert people and they will fuck you up.
Yeah. Hills Have Eyes and Wrong Turn.
Yes.
And it also makes perfect sense because, I don't know about you, but you drive not far out of Boise in Idaho, and you're going to see a lot of places like this where there's just so many cars just out in fields. And I always think about this. I'm just like, oh my God, what is going on over there?
That's the thing, though. That's how a lot of Texas is, because, Texas is such a big state, and,
huge.
Austin is it's a small geographically sized city that's very densely populated, but, you drive 30 minutes in any which way outside of Austin, and you get shit like this.
Yeah.
100%. This quite literally is about 30 minutes outside of Austin.
Right. We didn't even have to stage it. We just drove out there and here it was.
I will say, though, in that documentary, you can see the house before they set dressed it, and it looks like such a quaint little house.
Oh, cute. This house is, should I say the I word, Trace?
The I word?
It's iconic.
Oh my God. No, a listener's going to yell at you again for saying it.
It has such a presence to it, right? It looks a little colonial, It's white in the middle of a horizon of just kind of grays and browns and yellows. So it really does stand out. But when you see, Kirk and Pam walk up to this, it looks like a refuge. We're going to find civilization and maybe salvation here.
Yeah. But no.
But no.
Alas.
Alas, no. So they do have a working generator, so we assume they've got gas, and then we just ignore the fact that there's teeth on the front porch.
So many red flags. So many red flags.
So Pam sits on the swing, and this is when Kirk just says, oh, I'll let myself in. I'm making it sound like he doesn't make any kind of effort at due diligence. Like, he does knock, he does yell, but he eventually just decides, well, surely somebody is in here. So he just lets himself in, wanders down to the end of the hall. I do want to say this is one of those moments of fantastic efficiency on Hooper's part. So we've got these edits so that we're getting progressively closer to the wall of animal skulls at the end of the hall. And then
the squeals, like the pig, like the noises that are drawing him in there.
But like, there's no pretense here, right? Like, I'm always taken so off guard at how quickly he is hit in the head with the sledgehammer, and then Leatherface just grabs the body, closes the door, and the scene is over. And I feel like I barely had time to catch my breath.
Oh, that direct, blunt realism of this kill, and many of them, actually, you know, with no real music. Like, that's a moment that would have been scored to death in like any more traditional horror film, right? But just... there's nothing extra. It feels so real, and it makes it 10 times more frightening. Just the fact that it's not overdone.
Yeah.
Well, and that's the thing. I mean, like, I walked away from this being like, oh, wow, there's not any jump scares in that movie. However, I do think there are jump scares, but because they're unscored.
Yeah, they don't have a stinger.
Exactly. So, I mean, when we get to Kirk's death in a minute, it's like, oh, like, this is like, Leatherface appearing is a jump scare, but you don't have a stinger with it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So he's just gone. That is the end of that character. He dead.
Yeah. Oh, but I love the twitching. I love
and the
twitching.
feet.
Yeah.
Like that noise. Like everything is happening feels like that's what would happen. And it's so uncomfortable.
And this is, I may have said this on a previous episode before, but that's something I love because Tobe Hooper does say, you know, like if you hit someone like blunt force trauma in the head, bone fragments will enter their brain and cause them to spasm like this. And
yes,
I always go back to this, like one of my very first horror conventions. I went to a speech that Tom Savini was doing where someone like came up and like challenged him and was like, why do you like have all like the neck spray out blood whenever you decapitate someone? Like that's so unrealistic. And Savini, who was quite literally a Vietnam War veteran, was like, that does happen. I have seen it in person.
Yeah.
Yeah. What do you, I mean, how do you come back from that? Like that person just crawls away.
Oh,
I was going to say, that's when I fold myself into my own body and just shrivel up and die. Because can you imagine getting dressed down by Tom Savini?
I know.
No, thank you.
Okay, so Kirk is dead, but Pam is still outside, and she's like, hey, where the fuck is my hot boyfriend? So let's get this fantastic low-angle shot of her walking up to the house. And I can't remember who pointed this out or where I first saw this, but I never really associated the fact that we are seeing so much of her exposed back, right? Because she's wearing a halter top and her entire back is exposed. And it feels like this shot is explicitly designed to make you realize how vulnerable she is. And it anticipates the fact that that back is about to be impaled on a hook.
Well, because I also think like this is the shot of the film that I remember I'm watching a movie because it feels the most cinematic compared to every other shot in the film. Right. And that's why it stands out so much. Not just what we're seeing, but just how it's framed.
It's so stunning, though. It's like
it's
such
gorgeous.
The way it just flows under the swing and up in that. It also feels like we're with her in some way because we're not seeing the front of her. We're following her. Yeah. And we're low. So it's almost like we're spying on her a little bit.
Yes.
And it pulls you into the scene in such a way that is just... I'm getting goosebumps just thinking about it because you know, like, this is not going to be good. Something bad's going to happen. I know it.
But it's just a girl walking up to a house.
I know.
Like, the power of that. It's wild.
But I think if we wouldn't have just seen Kirk get murdered, like, it wouldn't have the same effect. So that it's happening, like, right afterwards where you're just like, girl, run away, get out, get out.
Yeah.
And because he never made a sound, right? So it's not even, oh, she's out of earshot. She doesn't know. She's feet away from her dead boyfriend's murdered body, but there's nothing to cue her that there's danger. So she's just like, oh, I guess I'll go and check on why he hasn't come out yet.
Yeah. Or even if you heard his feet like hitting that, that ramp or whatever, you out of context, you wouldn't know that's what that is.
No.
Could be anything.
Yeah.
And just, oh God, thinking about it from that way, imagining her sitting there hearing something and being like, what is that? And then knowing what that sound is being generated by. Ugh.
Yeah. So she goes inside, she's calling for Kirk, and she ends up stumbling through a curtain into a room full of chicken feathers, as well as human bone decorations and furniture.
Yeah, this is the moment where you're like, please run away. But it's like, again, like when you just see all of this, and this is, I think, when you really start smelling the movie too. But it's like,
yes,
oh,
but also
like,
the editing, right? Like it truly does kind of put us into her headspace because it feels like she is barely able to process. So it's all these kind of scattered shots of what is that? Oh my God, what is that? Oh my God, what is that? And it kind of brings me back to the opening with the Polaroids, right? Where it feels like we're barely able to understand what we're even seeing before we've moved on.
And I will say, I mean, I know we'll talk about Sally a lot, because like she takes up so much of the back half of this film, but it really is Terry McMinn's performance in this scene and specifically her reactions once she gets hooked that I find the most difficult to watch. And I feel like where I really feel the fear this character is feeling. And I think maybe it's because like at this point, Pam doesn't know exactly what's going on. She doesn't know that there's a Leatherface monster about to kill her, but like just her fear and like almost awe in a way of what she's seeing in this room. It's palpable.
Well, I love too that it's not, oh, I'm going to investigate because this is weird. Like she doesn't go up to this bone fucking couch and touch the femurs that are comprising the, the legs or anything. She sees it, has a freak out and makes a break for it. And she gets to the door. Like she does everything right.
Yeah.
And she only gets to the door, and we have to watch as Leatherface just scoops her up.
It's that shot of her being halfway out the door that he grabs her. I think that's one of the scariest shots of the movie because it's like, you're so close to maybe not freedom, but like not this prison
just
of a
getting
house.
away.
Yeah, exactly.
You also get to see the size of him too in comparison to her for the first time. It's kind of hard to see at first in that hallway, when he's. But there's no denying just the sheer scale of him, and it's horrifying.
Yeah.
She looks like a child in a grown man's embrace. And, there's a physicality to this moment. It's very brief, but I feel like we just in describing this with words, everyone knows exactly what we're talking about. You can absolutely picture it in your mind. It's with the arms and the legs kicking out as Leatherface is just grabbing her and pulling her back in.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not, there's some movies, especially maybe some Italian movies, where you see these women and they're like, oh no, and they're like just kind of like very slowly like throwing themselves against a wall or running down the stairs, and it's so funny and overdramatic. But here,
like authentic terror,
authentic flailing that actually feels like these women, both of them, I think, do this really well, where you believe they are trying to get away, and they are not, like, to some degree, not acting. Like, they probably can't get away. Gunnar Hansen's probably actually holding them pretty tightly to make sure, like, you're not going anywhere. Go ahead, fight. And they can't.
Yeah. And then there's, once again, just like Kirk, there's a very little time to even process or register what is happening. We just see her get put onto this hook.
Yes. So this is something, too, that the art director, he was like, I didn't do that scene. I wanted nothing to do with that scene. So, the makeup artist, Dorothy Pearl, she was like, so they had a harness for her. They were stuffing her back with pads so like it wasn't hurting her. But she could only be hung on that hook for about a minute at a time when they were shooting. But I will say, like, the sound she makes once she drops on it, I think it's really important, too, that you see a bit of a jerk to, like, show, like, oh, yeah, like, the hook caught her when she falls.
Yeah.
But it's just those sounds, the like, it sounds almost inhuman in a way.
Mm-hmm. I think this is probably the first time I've ever seen something like this. And I'll confess, I feel like I've seen so many people who end up on like deer or moose antlers in other horror films. Like I'm thinking of Silent Night, Deadly Night.
Friday the 13th has one.
It just, it never has the impact that this one does. And I think in part it's because I also conflate the movie poster for The Mutilator with this moment.
And that's, I mean, look, that's an entertaining movie, but it's not a good movie.
No.
Right. I think there's something again, I'm going to say it. There's something so visceral about this. Like the idea, I feel like I can imagine how fucking painful it would be to be alive and put onto a meat hook, and it seems unbearable. I would rather just die.
And I will say this, and not to keep bringing up the remake, but I do think that the remake's version of this scene is...
It's harder.
I would say it matches the effectiveness of this scene. Like, yeah. I think that that's one area where the film does a really good job of being like... I mean, we also get the thing, where he tries to pick himself up off of it and then falls again.
The worst.
And the salt in the leg wound. But, like, again, like that's where I think the remake captures the spirit and vibe of this original film very well.
The thing about the meat hook, too, is it actually tells us so much about this character of Leatherface. Because it's almost... like disrespectful, right? To put a human on that hook, knowing this isn't going to kill them right away. Yep. I just need her to just hang here for a second.
Yeah, I can't deal with her right now. So, like, let me hang her while I make her watch me cut up her boyfriend.
Yes, with the chainsaw.
And so we just immediately learn, like, okay, this person, whoever this is with this chainsaw here, zero empathy. Does not think of us as human beings. Like, he's looking at these kids like meat. And treating them as such. And that is fascinating.
Yeah. But I think it's because like Leatherface has this childlike quality to him, right? Like, he is the scariest figure in the film, but he's also like the most scared of everything else around him. Like, it feels almost like he's doing this out of fear, because it's like, oh, like, don't, like, I don't know. And it's interesting because he has no lines of dialogue. So, like, we're just gleaning this from Hanson's performance and the physicality of it.
Yeah, actually, maybe this is a good opportunity for me to bring Core back in, because within this piece, Core says, for Leatherface, the domestic sphere is the only one he knows. Therefore, this asexual, almost childlike man has become the family's necessary feminine presence, and his commitment to such a role shows how absurd the limitations of gender are within this traditional family.
Yeah.
I'll have more to say about the role that Leatherface plays in the family as we go. But yeah, I think you're absolutely right, Rachel. This, suggests not just, we don't see people as people, but this idea that humans are meat and we can treat them like animals because they are fit for consumption.
Ugh.
Yeah. Okay, so let's cut back to the van. It's dusk, so Pam and Kirk have been gone for a little while. We're starting to get worried, so Franklin frets too that the hitchhiker is still out there. So I love that Franklin is cognizant that, okay, it's not just, they've been gone for a while, maybe they've been fucking in the creek or something. It's, hey, there's that dangerous dude, and we're not that far away. So again, I'm giving points to Franklin for being aware of his surroundings.
Yep.
So Jerry is now the next to leave. This feels like a classic horror trope before it became a trope, where it's not like we're actively saying, I'm going to go wander off by myself. But it is, we just kind of get picked off one by one because somebody has to go looking, because the alternative is that we leave our friends behind.
Yep.
So Jerry leaves to search for Pam and Kirk, and Sally and Franklin stay at the van. And this is where we do get a better sense of their sibling dynamic. And, they're fighting, but they're also kind of hashing it out. You can tell that there is a love between them, but it's also that frustrated familial relationship, right? Where it's kind of like, just fuck off for a little bit. Like, I don't want to deal with you.
Mm-hmm.
I do think it's cute that even though she doesn't want him to come with her at first, he doesn't want to go, he does try to go with her. And because he's like, no, if you're really going to go, I'm going to go with you.
Mm-hmm.
This is true, yes. But first we have to follow Jerry because, I would argue Jerry is probably the least interesting character in this film, if only because we just see him driving. He doesn't really seem to engage all that much with Sally. And then he's like, well, I'll go off and be the big man. So he goes to the house. He finds Pam's body in the freezer. She's still alive.
Yeah.
Oh, and blue as fuck, too.
Yeah.
But, all right, so what I love about this scene, because this is so quick, right? Leatherface runs in and bashes him over the head, and he's out. But Jerry lets out this high-pitched scream that I feel like I rarely see from men in in horror movies, period. Like, we don't really let men scream a lot, and when we do, it's like, it's the deep scream. So, again, that's the thing. There's something just so primal about his, I don't want to say feminine scream, I was going to say high-pitched scream, you know, where it's like, this man knows he's about to die.
Yeah, he's not performing masculine gender in the face of death. He's just like, this is a sound that's coming out of me because there's a giant man with a sledgehammer coming at me.
Exactly. It feels very earned.
Yes. I mean, it's terrifying.
It is. Again, it's just so fucking fast. Like, every time I watch this movie, I marvel at the fact that until Sally has her fucking end of movie run around the entire fucking town... People just die in this movie. There is no pomp and circumstance to it at all. It's not beautiful. It's not gratuitous. It's just, you get hit. You get a stake in the back. It's just done.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very workmanlike.
Yeah, it's efficient.
There's no stalking. There's no stealth. There's no hidden agenda here. Like, this is purely just, this is my job. This is what I need to do. This isn't a Michael Myers. This isn't even a Jason, like, in the trees kind of thing. Like, seeing what I can get away with these kids and then pulling and hiding their bodies away. Like, no, he is completely approaching this unlike so many of our famous horror icons.
Yeah.
And I think it's, especially looking, us as modern horror fans, looking at this backwards with more modern eyes, it's not playing by the rules.
Right.
And I think that's what still makes this hit so hard.
It feels completely different.
Yeah.
So one of the other interesting things about this moment is after we have gotten rid of Jerry, we do follow Leatherface for a brief moment as he goes to the front of the house and kind of sits down and lets out a kind of shriek of distress. Like, why is this happening, or why do I have to keep doing this? And I never really thought about it, frankly, because I didn't understand the scene, because I was like, well, like, who is Leatherface? I don't know this character. And because he's nonverbal, we don't really know much about him. But I did think it's interesting when Core writes this one simple scene proves the twisted gender dynamics within the Sawyer household. And in Texas Chain Saw Massacre, Leatherface is the stand-in for the family's domestic goddess. And this is such a funny statement to say, but Core also makes reference that to the Sawyer family, and I think I've been calling them the Slaughter family, so I apologize. But
they are called the Slaughter in the fourth one.
Okay, there we go. I feel vindicated. But within the Sawyer household, this is actually a home invasion from their perspective.
Right.
Kids just keep coming and breaking into their house and they have to defend themselves. So I think it's kind of interesting that if we look at Leatherface as a bit of the de facto either asexual child and or stand-in female figure for the family, and we will see this as the mass change over the course of the film, but this is basically like a housewife who has to make dinner and kill the meat, but also defend the property because all of the men in her family have left.
Right. Yeah. And just, I think in that moment, it's really, like you said, all these kids keep coming in and is this what I'm supposed to do? Like, there's nobody here to help guide me in this moment. Like, am I reacting the right way?
Yep.
You know, I think Leatherface is a little bit of an overthinker, you know?
But I mean, I think because we know they are cannibals. So I think in this moment, it's just like, oh yeah, this is just food. Like food is somehow sent to the house. Whenever food shows up, I hook it.
Oh my God, it's the original DoorDash.
Just look for that bloody mark on the side of cars.
Oh, the delivery van is here. Teenagers keep coming to the door. Food for dinner.
Yeah, maybe just waiting. They're like, oh, they forgot something. I'm just going to wait here on the step and see if they bring it back here in a minute.
Oh, man, I forgot my Pam. Oh, there she is. Okay, cool. Get her up on the hook.
No, I asked for Pam cooking spray, not
Damn it. Well, you know what? You use what you got. All right, so we jump back to the van. It is now fully night. I don't know about you two, but I would be freaking the fuck out at this point. It's like your friends have all just left. You have no idea where they are. You don't have cell phones.
No gas.
You're almost out of gas. This is a terrible situation.
I'm fine up until they say, we don't have the keys to the car. And that is something like, and part of the reason why I don't like going camping in Texas also is because I don't like being that far away from civilization, period.
Mm-hmm.
But that is the thing. And like once night hits, there's no light for you anywhere. And we'll get a shot of that in this upcoming scene when Franklin dies. But it's like, it is legit. Whether there is a murderous cannibal family out there or not, it is just scary being in the middle of nowhere in Texas in the dark.
Yeah, you've got a flashlight, and we all know how much light an actual flashlight provides. It's a very small circle.
Yeah.
And it's also the two of us, right? Like, I understand why we don't leave Franklin, because he is a human fucking being and he doesn't want to be left outside of the vehicle at night in the Austin darkness. But trying to negotiate with the wheelchair, with the dim light, with the uneven terrain, like we've set all of this up that it's not easy for him to get around. And we're also terrified because what the fuck has happened to our friends? Like, I really like how Hooper has set up all of these conditions so that we understand how dangerous it is for the two of them to just embark with a flashlight.
Mm-hmm.
Which goes pretty wrong pretty fast.
Quickly.
Yeah. So unfortunately, Franklin is the next to get it. Again, no pretense. Leatherface just comes up and gets him right through the stomach, through the back of the chair with the chainsaw.
I checked the timestamp too. So basically, like, we've got 35 minutes of movie, and then at that 35-minute mark, that's when Kirk dies, and we just kill off the rest of them for the next 15 minutes. So, this is around the minute 50. And then from here on out, the next 30 minutes of this movie, it's just a waking nightmare.
Yeah.
I will say, so I don't know if this was an intentional homage or not, or if it even is an homage or not, but when Sally is running from Leatherface, because we get, chase, break for dinner, chase some more.
Yeah.
It felt like that scene in Walt Disney's original Snow White cartoon when she's running through the woods and her cape keeps getting caught on branches and stuff.
Oh, interesting.
But this keeps happening to Sally here, where her clothes keep getting stuck on brambles and branches, and I was like, is this Tobe Hooper's? Is he homaging Snow White, or am I just picking that up? I don't know.
I could see it.
Yeah, I could see it just as a classic. You're trying to get away, but even just the fleeing is you're not. It's almost like you're not allowed to because it's pulling you back. Like you're literally fighting to flee.
Yeah,
I feel like at every moment, Leatherface is like a hair's length away from her.
Oh my God. Yeah. It's definitely one of the most harrowing aspects of this. Like, not only does it feel like she's being chased for an interminably long period of time, we have no sense of geography, so we have no idea. She's just running in circles. But yeah, she keeps getting stumbled and caught on different things, and he's always so close. And the way that this is shot, it's like, oh my God, I need a fucking reprieve. I need a water break. I need to go to the bathroom. To the point where by the time we get to the dinner, I actually find it more relaxed, even though it's a different kind of harrowing, and she just continues screaming.
No, I agree with you. To me, even though the dinner scene is horrifying, it feels like a reprieve.
Different?
Yeah.
It's a different kind of horrifying.
It's relentless. It just continually one-ups itself in how disturbing. And it's fascinating because, like you mentioned, not a lot of gore, but that dinner scene is
gross,
so disturbing.
I mean, you have the fucking the light that's fixed over the dinner table with the fucking human face on it that is always in frame.
Everything, no matter where you look, there's something terrible and disgusting.
Yeah. So before we get to the dinner scene, Sally does, obviously she's made her way back to the house. She's gone upstairs. We see this room full of presumed corpses. So this is actually our introduction to Grandfather, who was played by John Duggan. But we think that he is just a desiccated corpse because they're not moving.
Well, because Grandma definitely is a desiccated corpse.
Yes. And it's only when Sally tries to go back downstairs, because she's locked the door and Leatherface is trying to saw through it with the chainsaw, but he manages to get back inside. And I will say my favorite scene of this entire film is when she runs up those stairs and she just throws herself without even a pause through the upstairs window and lands on the ground below. Because it's like, Yeah, it's what you do to survive.
It's so funny that we don't talk about this movie in terms when we talk about chase scenes. I guess because like it's literally like a 30-minute like chase scene almost. But but yeah, I agree with you. Like her jumping out the window is fantastic. I also just find the moment when she's running down the stairs and he has just gotten inside and she has to make that quick decision to go back up the stairs. Like that's very scary, right? Like it's like you got away and oops, he's right there again.
Yeah, well, and that's why she runs through the window. She knows that there's literally, this is my only option. And just to think about the actual mechanics of that, the way she doesn't hesitate to be so terrified to run straight through a window.
A second story window, mind you.
Yeah, it's not even like, oh, okay, I'm going to psych myself up. I'm going to, put my shoulder into it. It's just, if I'm remembering it correctly, we just are outside and we see her just come through the window.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, yeah, she just jumped.
Here's the thing. I kind of laugh a little bit every time because I think the visual itself is kind of comical in a way where it's like, oh, let's just jump through a window. But at the same time, simultaneously, it sells. I don't know how many times I can say
the
this.
Urgency.
The agent, the urgency and her fear. She is so fucking scared. She would rather risk death by whatever this is, defenestration. I'm sorry, that's the term for it.
Yes.
Than chainsaw.
Absolutely. Yeah. So she does end up eventually reaching the gas station, which we think is going to be a different kind of reprieve, right? She is back in civilization, even though this old man definitely gives off a bit of a creepy vibe. So he brings her inside. He's trying to calm her down, and then he leaves briefly, and you think he's probably calling the police. He's going to get her a blanket or something. No, he comes back with rope and a sack, and then he beats her unconscious with a broom handle. Okay,
but don't you love the way he comes in from outside? Like, he's not like, hey, I'm the bad guy now, let's get you. He's talking to her like, hey, I'm going to put this on you, we're going to go back to the house.
Okay, so question for you folks. Do you think he's treating her like livestock?
Oh.
No.
You don't think so? It's not like the way you would talk to an animal, okay, hey, everybody, you're going to be fine. I'm just going to put this thing on you, and then...
I just think he's more aware and more enjoying it than, like, I think Leatherface is, whether it's a condition thing, like, has been conditioned to think of it that way, or has, some sort of mental thing going on where he's not fully comprehending what's happening.
Right.
But I feel like he knows what he's doing. Like, he knows that she's just a young woman, and he's treating her like meat a little bit, but I think he's also relishing in it.
I mean, the way that he's hitting her, and Trace, this is kind of the way that you described watching Marilyn Burns go out the window. It's a little bit funny to see him hitting her with this broom handle, in part because I feel like it's not fully effective. And later on at dinner, he'll say this is not his favorite part. Like, he doesn't take any pleasure in the killing, but it feels like this is the start of a bit of comedy, right? Even the way that he's like, yeah, haha, I'm also bad, but I'm not going to do a big villain monologue. I'm just going to go out to the car and get some stuff, and then I'm going to put the bag over your head.
Yeah.
So he does. Yeah, she's unconscious. We put her into the front of the truck. This is where we head back to the house, and as soon as she's conscious, she is screaming. So I gotta feel like Marilyn Burns probably had a completely hoarse throat by the end of this 30-day shoot, because like fully half the film is just her screaming.
I can't even imagine how much like I don't even know what you drink for something like warm tea, and like how many.
I need a lozenge, Toby. I need a lozenge.
Like she just had to be, and she kills it because I believe her. I believe she's terrified 100% of the time. There's not a moment where I feel like, okay, that she's acting there. Nope. I believe every second of this.
Yeah. So we pause so that we can pick up the hitchhiker, and he hops into the back with a bag of raccoons because, hey, just in case the kids didn't pan out, we had to do something else for dinner, I guess. And when we get back to the house, this is when the old man complains that the hitchhiker left his brother alone. So that's when we establish the relationship between Leatherface and the hitchhiker. And Sally gets tied to a chair. And this is when the old man berates Leatherface, who we should note is now dressed as a housewife with the grandma skin mask. And We complain, why did you have to kill the kids? Oh, and also you ruined the door.
I love that. Like, what'd you do to the door?
Priorities.
That's that comedy. Okay, but so, because truthfully, I had actually forgotten that we get, like, female Leatherface in this movie.
Right.
I thought, I really, like, in my mind, I remember it as an exclusively, like, fourth film thing.
Mm-hmm.
So this is interesting. And, because this is also a family with no matriarch, no female.
We've got dead grandma, but she's out of the picture.
No, it looks like she died a while ago, too.
Yeah.
So I find this so interesting that Leatherface is, like, playing now the role of the matriarch in this movie. And we also don't address it.
I mean, we do and we don't, right? So I'm going to bring Core back in, and maybe we can use that to frame some of this conversation. So Core says, Leatherface is literally coded as a woman throughout the film, right down to being forced, well, I would argue not forced, that we see, but wears a wig and makeup during the dinner scene. His brutal murders are, within the context of the family's twisted logic, his domestic duty. So his brutalization and dismemberment of the teenagers is comparable to a housewife preparing dinner. He is chastised for letting his younger brother run amok, suggesting that whilst his father is at work, he also provides as the family's moral guidance when the father is not at home.
Yeah. It is interesting to think about how this family has sort of put him in that role based off of, I guess how they value him and his whatever sort of diminished capacity he has. But ultimately, obviously, clearly, he's the MVP here, right?
Well, it's weird, right? Because I think especially at this time period, like one of Core's big arguments is that you can read the film through an interesting, both feminist as well as a queer lens.
Yeah.
Or like how the film is sort of responding to this idea, because they're trying to be a nuclear family, but because they don't have a matriarch and because the capitalist system has let them down, they're actually just playing house. Like they're trying to be the model that we should aspire to as Americans. And of course, they can't do it because they don't have a job anymore and they don't have a wife or a mother anymore. So this ends up being like a twisted parody of what you should aspire to be, but they can't let it go. They have to keep up the pretense right down to the sort of Norman Rockwell-esque dinner table sequence.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
I do love looking at it in that way. And that is where you see the humor. And I love hearing Hooper like talk about this because he's always like, how do you not see it? It's like, well,
you're so traumatized.
Because we're being so fucking upset by it. It's like, here's the thing. If Sally wasn't here and we just watched them go about this dinner and assume this kind of parody, I do think it would be very funny. But we keep having to see Sally being tied to this chair and getting extreme close-ups of her eyes.
Extreme close-ups.
I'm just so aligned with her and how frantic she is to get away that I'm like, I see the funny, but also I want to get the fuck out of here with Sally.
Yeah, I can see how it's easily missed. Let's just say that.
Yeah.
You just got to watch it 50 times.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Because all of the actual conversation that the family members are having is kind of ridiculous, right? Mm-hmm. Like, we've got the hitchhiker saying like, oh, well, we should get Grandpa down here. And then talking about how Grandpa was the best killer at the slaughterhouse. So he should absolutely get to take a crack at Sally with this mallet. And I will say the moment I've always found very, very funny is the fact that we talk a big game about Grandpa, but he's basically living dead. And he can't even hold this fucking mallet, so we're trying to guide his hand to hit this poor fucking woman and kill her.
Yeah.
It's over the top.
Well, they're living in the past, right? They're living in this past that does not exist anymore and are refusing to see or acknowledge it.
Yeah. It's funny and horrifying. So Grandpa cannot make a connection. He does actually hit her like once or twice, but the blows are pretty feeble.
Well, I actually think that the blows are like easy compared to the finger sucking he does to her when they cut her finger.
Oh, yeah. I forgot about that. That little like blood dance of joy that he does.
The sound of the sucking too. Also, rumor has it that they actually did cut her finger because the blood pump they had wasn't working.
Oh.
But yeah, I think it's just the sucking sounds that Grandpa makes. Again, it's like,
so gross.
Yeah. So they actually had to untie her from the chair to get her into position to be kneeling in front of Grandpa. So this leaves her a little bit more mobility to throw them off. And then, if you're going to break one window, you might as well break two. So
I know. I do think that's kind of funny.
So yeah, she manages to make her escape as we see Dawn approaching, but she is definitely injured from all of this. So she's limping while running, and we've got the hitchhiker and Leatherface in pursuit.
Mm-hmm.
Rachel, do you play video games ever?
No.
Okay. Well, so then for both of you, the Texas Chain Saw Massacre game that came out last year, they recreate this house like perfectly for the level. It's like they have the backyard, the driveway, and the house. But there are two windows, the exact same one Sally jumps out of, that you can jump out of in this house. And
Amazing.
there is a trophy if you jump out of the dining room window and you do successfully make it to the end of the driveway, which means you escape the match. You get a trophy for, I think it's called like Just Like Sally or Do It Like Sally.
Oh, nice. That's too funny. So we should note that she is pretty far ahead of Leatherface because he had to stop off and get the chainsaw and get it going. But the hitchhiker is right behind Sally. And this just added little sadist touch of the hitchhiker slashing her back as she runs.
Yeah.
Just all of it, to be so unbothered by somebody clearly suffering immensely and horrifyingly terrified.
But it's also a thing too where he could easily kill her.
Oh, he's playing
right away.
Playing with his food,
playing
right?
with his food, exactly.
Yeah.
And but again, it's the thing where he's like right on her the entire fucking time. Like there is no reason she should still be alive.
No. But I will say it does make it extra gratifying that he is so interested in cutting her the fuck up with this blade that he doesn't even notice the truck barreling down on him. And I let out my own little pig squeal whenever he gets run over.
Your bitch hog squeal. I think that's what the cook calls him, a bitch hog.
Sure, yeah, let's go with that.
No, but this is fantastic. Also, like, I love it when we run someone over and we actually see a dummy go into the wheels. Like that is
always
it's
10 out of 10.
Perfect.
Yeah, give me a dummy any day of the week. So Sally does manage to get pulled inside by the driver, but I love that this man is not a hero. He barely understands what the fuck is going on, and he also makes a bunch of bad decisions because I feel like it's actually quite true to life. So he kind of pulls her inside the cab and we manage to close the door, but he's so freaked out by Leatherface showing up and slashing at the door with the chainsaw that instead of just driving away, we both get out on the other side of the truck and just abandon it to run down the highway.
What happens to him?
No,
Where does he go?
He literally runs down the street or the highway, and we never see him again.
Okay,
So,
that's what I just want to make sure I didn't. I was like, I've never understood what he just disappears. He just goes away.
well, and that was where I was like, why are we going out the other side of this car? Like, isn't the truck on? Like, move, drive.
Yeah, but they're not thinking about it, right? I mean, even to the point where we do see this driver for one more moment because he throws a wrench at Leatherface. That's why Leatherface falls and ends up cutting his leg with the chainsaw. But then after that, this guy just fully says, oh, fuck this and fuck that truck, and just runs the other way.
Yep.
So Leatherface is not down, but he is injured. This gives Sally enough time to barely flag down another passing vehicle, and she climbs in the back and just starts screaming, go, go, go.
It takes her a long time to get into the bed of that truck. I was like, oh my God. It's that close call shit where I was like, okay, I get it. You know, you are very weak. You're probably dehydrated. You have been running and screaming for your life for the past God knows how long. But she can barely get her leg up in that truck.
Yep. It's a close call for sure. But the truck does eventually end up taking off, and Sally is this is one of the all-time great endings, right? So Sally's face, she is screaming hysterically. In some ways, it's very easy to see why we decided to make her who she is when we make that Netflix movie, because this obviously fucked her up.
Yeah, this you go through something like this, you come out a different person.
Well, that's why this ending doesn't feel like a win. Like, I mean, I'm happy she survived, but at what cost, you know?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, you're worried for her at this moment. You're not like, yeah, and she's not cheering like she's broken.
Yes, absolutely destroyed. She will need much therapy. And of course, our other final image is an emasculated, very frustrated Leatherface who decides, well, I'm going to welcome this new day by swinging my faux dick, aka the chainsaw, through the air. It's kind of an interpretive dance, and I quite like it.
I know. I always felt like it was kind of him throwing a little bit of a tantrum.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Like, one of them got away. But also, if you think about it, if he has, I guess, the emotional capacity to understand what's at stake, by letting a survivor get away, this could mean the end of the entire family.
Yeah, he's failed.
Yeah.
He's failed.
Well, it's not, so.
It's not, so. They will be fine, don't worry.
Like, this family seemingly always eludes the police force.
Wow. Isn't that just Texas for you, baby?
Yeah.
Blinders. Don't want to see it.
Right. But that's it. That's the Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Ooh.
The beginning and the end, I think are like some of the best in all of horror history. Like, incredible beginning, incredible ending.
Yeah.
And to be able to do that, not a lot of movies that can say that they land both. A lot of them nail the beginning, but then the ending is a little eh.
Right.
No, this one, greatest on both ends.
Does
Perfect bookends.
Yeah. There's just something, again, like, just so haunting and evocative about the sounds of her screams. It's weird, right? Even her screams at the end sound, well, they sound different than the screams from before, earlier in the film, because she's cracked. She's lost her mind by this point.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. But honestly, the experience of watching this film, as I said, I appreciate it. I'm like you, Trace. I discover new things each time I watch it. But it is so harrowing. It's such an endurance test. It's so visceral. As I said, I feel like I can smell and just feel all sorts of things I don't care to with this movie. Yeah. It reminds me of the same kind of feelings I have with New French Extremity, which I think is the reason why I enjoy it, but I also can't revisit it too often.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it is a tricky one for sure. And the same thing, to be honest, the Glass House on the Left.
Yeah.
It's very similar. Appreciate it. Has some great things in it.
It's just a lot.
Yeah. You know, you just have to be in the right headspace. It's not something I'm going to throw on. It's not a comfort horror watch for me.
It's so interesting because I agree. I very rarely go back and rewatch the original Last House on the Left, but my husband just went back and rewatched the remake, which he hadn't seen in a while, and he was like,
boy.
But it's the thing where it's like, I know that remake is watered down, quote unquote, because we don't kill one of the girls, but I don't think it's any less harrowing or effective.
No,
and actually, folks, in case you don't know, we do actually have a full-length Patreon episode on that remake of The Last House on the Left.
Yeah, again, to me, like the trifecta of the 2000s remakes, it's Texas Chainsaw, Last House on the Left, and The Hills Have Eyes. Like those are the best ones that I would argue. Like I sometimes like them more than the originals.
I was gonna say they're certainly the meanest.
Yeah, they are.
That's true. Yeah.
But okay, well, Texas Chainsaw. Rachel, as the guest of honor, and first of all, thank you for coming to join us for this, but any final thoughts on this film?
It's easy to see why it's as influential and iconic as it is.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
It's still as powerful, I think, as it was 50 years later. Like, that's insane.
Yeah.
It's wild.
For it to have so little gore and so little practical effects, but to still be so powerfully unsettling and disturbing.
Yeah.
Really speaks to how well a lot of those other elements were executed. And I mean, it's really actually pretty inspiring to think about, okay, this is what you can do. You can do a lot with a little, right?
Yeah.
And maybe you don't have the big, huge practical effects budget, but if you invest a little over here, suddenly all these things become so much more scary. And like you said, there's always something more to find in it. And that's fascinating, I think. And just, time, being able to look, hindsight's 2020, just being able to see kind of how the environment has shaped it and how these things sort of resonate so much differently at the time versus now and all of that. It's just such an incredible text that just continues to just give us so much good stuff to dig into.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And considering it's really easy to dismiss this as being slight in terms of characters, narrative, to me, it really does. It honestly comes back to the direction and the editing. Like, had this been poorly executed, I don't think it would stand the test of time. But that's where a lot of the film's power comes from.
Totally. It'd feel more exploitative or sleazy. And this it transcends all of that. And it has proven to be something in a completely different category.
I mean, I do think it feels sleazy, but like by design.
Well, here, as maybe one last gentle fucking plug, because I would like people to listen to my other podcast, the final Geen text that we talk about, which we argue is actually an adaptation of this movie and less so Geen, is Rob Zombie's House of a Thousand Corpses.
Oh, yes.
Right, because that movie is very much Rob Zombie's Texas Chain Saw Massacre.
Yeah, and that's like just a very different way to do it, where it does feel that extra amount of sleazy exploitation, kind of over the top. I still like the film, but when you compare them back to back, you're just like, oh man, look at how efficient the economy of scale is in Hooper and what he manages to do with it.
That's, I know we've made that comparison before, but I've never thought about actually doing a double feature of the original TCM and House of a Thousand Corpses.
It was fascinating.
I do think also like Rob Zombie picked up on Hooper's comedy, because I do think there's a lot of comedy in House of a Thousand Corpses around the family members. So yeah, that's very interesting, actually. I never thought about that.
Yeah. Listen to my other podcast.
Everyone go listen to his other podcast. What's the name of it, Joe, again?
Murder Made Fiction.
I've been loving it. Just speaking as a true fan of it's been so good so far.
Oh, if you like true crime, if you like horror, go listen.
There we go.
All right, everyone. Well, before we announce what we're covering next week, Rachel, let everyone know, where can they find you on social media?
Sure. Yeah, you can find me on Instagram at the Vinyl Girl, GRRRL. Yeah, and you can catch me on the Halloweenies or the Losers Club podcast. Lots of fun stuff coming up. Halloweenies, we just wrapped up our Alien coverage. And yeah, some of our best, honestly.
Oh, nice.
And then, on Losers Club, they just covered Bazaar of Bad Dreams, and we just recorded an episode on End of Watch, the third installation in the Bill Hodges trilogy. So if you're a Hodges head, you can finish out that ride with us. And then also, I have to say, with Jen, The Girls on the Boys, we also just wrapped up season 4 of The Boys. And so that was a wild ride as well.
Nice.
All right. Well, if you want to get in touch with us, you can reach us on Twitter and Instagram at HorrorQueers. Shoot us an email at horrorqueers@gmail.com. Find us on Letterboxd, keep track of all the films we've covered. And if you want to chat with other listeners, please join our Facebook Horror Queers group. If you have a moment, please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Again, we're doing a special theme for 6 weeks, so do it. Give us a review. We love it. We deserve it. And if you want even more content, please support the show by becoming a patron at patreon.com/horrorqueers. If you subscribe today, you'll get 335 hours of Patreon content, including this month's new episodes on Hannibal Season 1, Episode 10. It's What's Inside, Apartment 7A, Salem's Lot, and a bonus episode on Freeway 2, Confessions of a Trick Baby, and our brand new audio commentary on Wes Craven's New Nightmare for its 30th anniversary.
Ooh, okay.
Joe.
Yes.
We have another juggernaut next week, and one of your favorite films.
This is true, yes. We're sticking with our 50s because we're going to talk about the other milestone horror text that comes out in 1974. People should recognize it because you've already name-dropped it in this episode, Trace. Christmas is Coming Early, and we're going to look at Bob Clark's Black Christmas.
Ah, God, I know. And this is another one of those movies where when I first saw it, I was kind of like, oh, this is kind of boring. And then, I know.
Young Trace was a bit of a dum-dum, but we love to bring him back so we can compare and contrast.
I've got to rewatch. Actually, I've got to rewatch the original Hills Have Eyes too, because I remember thinking that one was kind of boring too, which is why I like the remake so much. But anyway, I love Black Christmas, and I do think Black Christmas is a legitimately scary movie, and it also very progressive for 1974.
Oh my God, we're actually saying the word abortion, baby.
We are saying it. We are talking about it. Ah!
Yes.
And of course, Queen Margot Kidder as the head bitch in charge.
Love it.
But everyone, until next week, we can cross out the Texas Chain Saw Massacre.
Man, okay, yeah. And also cross out Horror Queers.